All right, Chapter 7, the Earth as a Giant Power Plant. The structures of the Giza Plateau in Egypt are perhaps the most famous examples of technological wonders built by the ancients using technologies we can neither understand or duplicate today. Who built these monuments, how, and why has been the focus of immense speculation over the years. The Sphinx is one of the three most controversial structures in Egypt, along with the Great Pyramid and the Osirian at Abydos, carved out of solid rock. The Sphinx seems to typify the mystery of Egypt as it gazes silently out away from the pyramids. Well, it's aligned. It's aligned to Leo. It's aligned to... Come on, Childress, that's fucking kindergarten, dude. You ought to know that. It's not just staring blankly out into nowhere. It's had a very specific alignment with very specific astrological significance. He just, I don't know. Sometimes some of his stuff just seems kind of hackish to me. It's like, really? You may, I mean, just because you've gone all over the world, all these ancient sites, it doesn't mean you know anything. You know, that can't give you common sense or the ability to research and read on your own. Anyway, the age of the Sphinx is a matter of great debate. The body is severely eroded, though the Egyptian government is now reconstructing it. What could have caused this heavy decay? The controversial German Egyptologist Schwaller de Lubicus observed that the dramatically severe erosion on the body could not be the result of wind and sand, as universally assumed, but was rather the result of water. Geologists agree that in the not-so-distant past, Egypt was subjected to severe flooding. This period is usually held to coincide with the melting of the ice from the last ice age, circa 15,000 to 10,000 BC. This would indicate that the Sphinx was already constructed by this time, but would make it easily the oldest structure in Egypt, built long before the recognized Egyptian civilization began. Suddenly, we are back to the tales of the ancient Osirian Empire, Atlantis, and the cataclysmic pole shifts that have rocked our planet every 10,000 years or so. The Sphinx is often said to be the likeness of the pharaoh Chephren, of whom several statues, one in the form of a sphinx, were found upside down in the temple next to the Sphinx. The Sphinx, in fact, is said to have been recarved at least once, and its head is unnaturally small for its body, indicating that it once had a much larger head. Perhaps the pharaoh Chephren had the Sphinx recarved to his likeness during his lifetime. Yeah, well, they had to get rid of that elongated alien skull head it had before. They knew that was they were not going to be able to keep people controlled if they had, the big elongated alien skull head there. That's that's why Akhenaten had his head shaped that way and the rest of it. The Valley Temple of Chephren next to the Sphinx is also an unusual structure. It is constructed of huge granite and limestone blocks weighing up to 100 tons apiece. No inscriptions of any kind were found in the temple, and the blocks are perfectly fitted together in a curious jigsaw pattern that interlocks the blocks. As has been noted previously, this is a trademark of the builders, a type of megalithic construction that is not only extremely difficult to make, but also difficult to tear down. Because the blocks are interlocked, they cannot shear like bricks or square blocks of masonry. It is especially interesting to compare the construction technique found at the Valley Temple of Chephren to that at Cuzco, Sacsayhuaman, Ollantaytambo, Tambo, and even Machu Picchu. There are also said to be secret passages beneath the Giza Plateau. These passages go to the pyramids, allegedly starting from the Sphinx, and are part of the ancient mystery schools of Egypt. Yeah. Manly P. Hall talks about that. You have to go in there with your etherical temple garment on, and you battle this all-seeing eye thing that turns out to be an illusion, and then, you go into the mystery religions after that. A strange shaft in the Giza Plateau between the Pyramid of Chephren and the Sphinx is known as Campbell's Tomb or Campbell's Well. This shaft is now blocked by a grate, but one can still look down it. The shaft is about 15 feet square on each side and about 100 feet deep. On each side of the walls, one can see numerous tunnels, passages, and doors cut into solid rock. These passageways are part of the tunnel system that goes beneath the Giza Plateau. It is purposely dangerous to attempt to reach the pyramids or the secret underground rooms that can be found in the tunnels. Their existence and what lies in them is a matter of legend and prophecy. It has been suggested that a secret library from Atlantis is hidden somewhere inside, underneath, or nearby the pyramids of Giza. This library is generally called the Ancient Hall of Records. According to some, the ancient Hall of Records preserved ancient knowledge in the form of encoded quartz crystals, much like a hologram might be encoded by a laser today. Also in these secret chambers, sealed from the rest of mankind during the dark ages of Egyptian history when the evil priesthood sought to control mankind, are supposedly machines and devices from that forgotten age. There is a belief by some that the Ark of the Covenant was contained inside the Great Pyramid for some time and then taken by Moses when the Israelites split for the Promised Land. The pyramids of the Giza Plateau have been recognized as feats of engineering wonder since time immemorial. Herodotus of the Greeks claims that he was told by priests 2,000 years or more after the Great Pyramid's construction that teams of 10,000 men each labored for 10 years to build a ramp for the blocks. Then another 20 years to build the pyramid, and finally another 10 years to put the casing stones on the pyramid, starting from the top down. Yeah, that's total bullshit. They claim they were built in 20 years. There's no way. Herodotus claimed that Cheops financed the construction by having his own daughter work as a prostitute. And it's Daddy needs a pyramid, girl. Get up there and sell that ass. God damn. They just bang the shit out of this guy so he can get him a pyramid built. Fuck. An inscription read to Herodotus at the base of the pyramid by priests told the number of onions and radishes it took to feed the laborers. Yet it appears that Herodotus was being told a story. No trace of a ramp has actually ever been discovered. Most scholars believe that the ramp Herodotus refers to is the causeway leading up from the Nile past the Sphinx. All the pyramids had this causeway leading up to them, but it apparently had nothing to do with their construction. There are no actual wall writings of a pyramid being constructed, but there are drawings that portray the transport of gigantic obelisks and giant statues weighing more than 100 tons by men pulling sleds. According to John Anthony West, even though it was possible to muster up enough labor to build the pyramids over time, some sort of lifting device would have had to have been employed, which so far no one has come up with. Yeah, well, they have the Coral Castle in Florida. The guy that built that used the same technology that built the pyramids. That's a fact. It's a sort of anti-grav device. Other engineers claim that no lifting device was needed and that the ramp merely had to reach the top of the pyramid. However, a Danish engineer named P. Garde Hansen has calculated that such a ramp would require 17.5 million cubic yards of material, 7 times more than used in the building of the pyramid itself. Garde Hansen believes that a ramp going halfway up the pyramid would be better, but it would still be necessary to use a lifting device, which brings us back to the old problem. The placing of the limestone casing stones, which weigh up to 10 tons or more, is an even bigger problem as they are cut and fitted with such precision. Cheops did not even sign his own pyramid. The only marks in the pyramid are quarry marks on granite blocks on the inside of the pyramid. These were only discovered with the tearing apart of the pyramid and were never meant to be seen. One possibility is that the ingenious theory that the pyramid itself was a hydraulic pump and the blocks were floated into place on rafts from nearby Lake Moeris. Another theory that has a certain attraction to mystics is that the blocks were levitated using what the Egyptians called ma'at, a force of mind power akin to the Sanskrit mana power of the mind. Was the Great Pyramid poured into place? One curious theory of the pyramids is postulated by an authority on ancient construction techniques named Dr. Joseph Devotovitz. Devotovitz claims that he's been saying over the last several years that the Great Pyramid of Egypt, as well as the other pyramids in Egypt, was not constructed out of cut stone as has always been assumed. Devotovitz claims that the large blocks were actually poured into place and that they are an advanced and ingenious form of synthetic stone that was cast on the spot like concrete. Davidovich reports on his research at the meeting of the American Chemical Society in the mid-1980s. He is founder and director of the Institute for Applied Archaeological Sciences located near Miami. He is also author of the 1988 book, The Pyramids, An Enigma Solved. Davidovich claims that a new deciphering of an ancient hieroglyphic text has provided some direct information about pyramid construction and that it supports his theory that synthetic stone was the construction material. The text, called the Famine Stele, was discovered 100 years ago on an island near Elephantine. It consists of 2,600 hieroglyphics, about 650 of which have been interpreted as dealing with stone fabrication techniques. The text claims that an Egyptian god gave the instructions for making synthetic stone to Pharaoh Zoser, who is said to have built the first pyramid in 2750 BC. Included were a list of 29 minerals that could be processed with crushed limestone and other natural aggregates into a synthetic stone for use in the building of temples and pyramids. Like the chemists of the 17th and 18th centuries, the Egyptians named these minerals according to their physical properties. The materials were called onion ore, garlic ore, and horseradish ore because of their distinctive smells. Davidovich believes the minerals in the ores contained arsenic. Other ingredients for making synthetic stone, phosphates from bones or dung, Nile silt, limestone, and quartz were also readily available. According to the theory, the ingredients were mixed with water and placed into wooden forms similar to those used for concrete. Davidovich said the cement in the pyramid stone binds the aggregate and other ingredients together chemically in a process similar to that involved in the formation of natural stone. Thus, pyramid stone is extremely difficult to distinguish from natural stone. Portland cement, by contrast, involves mechanical rather than molecular bonding of its ingredients. Also, Egyptian cement would last for thousands of years, while ordinary cement has an average lifespan of only 150 years. Organic fibers having accidentally fallen into the mixture have been found in the stone blocks of the Great Pyramid, claims Davidovich. What was the function of the pyramids? Actually, though it is usually said that the pyramids were tombs for the pharaohs, the evidence is generally against this theory, startling as it may seem. No Egyptian mummy was ever found in a pyramid. Many Egyptian mummies have been found, but not inside pyramids. Rather, they've been found in underground vaults and tunnels, such as those in the Valley of the Kings where Tutankhamun was found. As the normally traditional archaeologist Kurt Mendelsohn says in his book, The Riddle of the Pyramids, while the funerary function of the pyramids cannot be doubted, it is rather more difficult to prove that the pharaohs were ever buried inside of them. Leaving out Zoser's step pyramid with its unique burial chambers, the 9 remaining pyramids contain no more than 3 authentic sarcophagi. These are distributed over no fewer than 14 tomb chambers. Petrie has shown that lidless sarcophagus in the Khufu Cheops pyramid had been put into the king's chamber before the latter was roofed over, since it is too large to pass through the entrance passage. One would like to know what has happened to the missing sarcophagi. The robbers might have smashed their lids, but they would hardly have taken the trouble to steal a smashed sarcophagus. In spite of careful search, no chips of broken sarcophagi have been found in any of the pyramid passages or chambers. Moreover, it has to be remembered that from the medium pyramid onward, the entrance was well above ground level. At the bent pyramid, even the lower corridor is located 12 meters above the base, and bringing a heavy sarcophagus in or out would have necessitated the use of a substantial ramp. The fact that sarcophagi in the Khufu and Khafre Chephren pyramids were found empty is easily explained as the work of intruders, but the empty sarcophagi of Sekhmet, Queen Hetepheres, and a third one in a shaft chamber under a step pyramid pose a different problem. They were all left undisturbed since early antiquity. As these were burials without a corpse, we are almost driven to the conclusion that something other than a human body may have been ritually entombed. We have already referred to the fact that Sneferu seems to have had 2 or even 3 large pyramids, and he can hardly have been buried in all of them. While very few people will dispute that the pyramids had some connection with the afterlife of the pharaoh, the general statement that the pharaohs were buried in them is by no means undisputable. Quite possibly each pyramid one housed the body of Pharaoh, but there also exists an unpleasantly large number of factors that speak against it. It is on the basis of these complexities and contradictions that Egyptologists have had to try and find a solution to the most difficult problem of all. Why were these immense pyramids built in the first place? If the pyramids weren't tombs, what were they? There is the theory that they are astronomical observatories. Another idea is that the pyramids, especially the Great Pyramid, were geodetic markers and time capsules in the sense that higher knowledge, such as sophisticated geometry and mathematics, were incorporated into the structures. Others have claimed the pyramids were centers of inspiration. Then, of course, there is always pyramid energy. The word pyramid is, in fact, Greek for fire in the center. The next chapter is the Giza power plant. Now, interestingly enough, and hopefully this chapter, it's kind of a long chapter, but I want to get through it tonight. Hopefully this chapter will shed some light on something I've had questions about in my research for the new film concerning the rock wall. And in the footage from the John Lindsay 1999 rock wall dig, there's clips of that in the little trailer I've got up on the website for the Lost Secrets of Ancient America, Volume 1. And in that footage, the guy who wrote the book, The Giza Power Plant, was there checking out the scene. And I was wondering what correlations he believed the rock wall had to the idea of the Giza power plant. Now, I've seen my own correlations, but I haven't seen anything saying what he thought. So maybe this chapter will shed some light on that. The belief that the pyramids were a device for tapping the energy of the Van Allen radiation belts, where the bulk of the pyramid served as a protective baffle, like insulation around an electric cable, is perhaps the most incredible suggestion of all. That is an interesting suggestion. Is that what this guy, Christopher Dunn, believes? He's the guy that wrote the Giza Power. That's interesting. I haven't read his book, and I wasn't familiar with what he was jiving at, but that is interesting when you think about supposedly the Van Allen radiation belts being this ethereal energy barrier placed around Earth to keep us from escaping. And that these pyramids somehow served as a way to be able to mitigate that barrier. And you know, it being high technology people that created it, it's definitely an interesting proposition. And definitely makes me more interested to find out what he thought the rock wall had a correlation to this for. This theory is now championed by British engineer Christopher Dunn. Dunn is the author of the 1998 book, The Giza Power Plant, Technologies of Ancient Egypt. In his book, Dunn outlines his theories and gives evidence for advanced machining and engineering knowledge in ancient Egypt. Dunn claims that the Earth may be a giant power plant, and the many pyramids, obelisks, and megalithic standing stones may be a part of this great energy system. He says that the Great Pyramid was a giant power plant and that harmonic resonators were housed in slots above the king's chamber. Oh, so the resonant stuff of the rock wall, how it vibrated and rang like a bell, and when they put that big tractor on top of it, it shook like it was going to take flight. That's why he had an interest in the rock wall, because he thought it was a part of this, another one of these megalithic structures that it works in combination with this energy grid system, and perhaps it does. Perhaps it does. I would say that's not a stretch, considering the information that I have. Well, that's not a stretch at all. So, okay. It didn't take me long to get that question answered. All right, yeah, totally. I mean, I could definitely see the rock walls being a part of that. He says that the giant pyramid was a giant power plant and that harmonic resonators were housed in slots above the king's chamber. He also theorized that there was a hydrogen explosion inside the king's chamber that shut down the power plant's operation. In August 1984, Analog magazine published Dunn's article, Advanced Machining in Ancient Egypt. It was the study of the book Pyramids and the Temples of Giza, written by Sir William Flinders Petrie. Dunn is convinced that sophisticated machining was used in certain cases. Says Dunn, since the article's publication, I have visited Egypt twice, and with each visit, I leave with more respect for the ancient pyramid builders. Well, in Egypt in 1986, I visited the Cairo Museum, and I gave a copy of my article along with a business card to the director of the museum. He thanked me kindly, threw it in a drawer to join the other sundry material, and turned away. Another Egyptologist led me to the tool room to educate me in the methods of the ancient masons by showing me a few cases that housed primitive copper tools. I asked my host about the cutting of granite, for this was the focus of my article, and he explained that the ancient Egyptians cut a slot in the granite, inserted wooden wedges, and then soaked them with water. The wood swelled, creating pressure that split the rock. Splitting rock is vastly different than machining it, and he did not explain how copper implements were able to cut granite, but he was so enthusiastic with his dissertation that I did not interrupt. To prove his argument, he walked me over to a nearby travel agent, encouraging me to buy airplane tickets to Aswan, where he said the evidence is clear. I must, he insisted, see the quarry marks there as well as the unfinished obelisk. Dutifully, I bought the tickets and arrived at Aswan the next day. After learning some of the Egyptian customs, I got the impression that this was not the first time that my Egyptologist friend had made that quarry marks at Aswan trip to the travel agent. The quarry marks I saw there did not satisfy me that the methods described were the only means by which the pyramid builders quarried their drill hole at Aswan Rock. There is a large round hole drilled into the bedrock hillside that measures approximately 12 inches in diameter and 3 feet deep that is located in the channel which runs the length of the estimated 3,000-ton obelisk. The hole was drilled at an angle with the top intruding into the channel space. The ancients may have used drills to remove material from the perimeter of the obelisk, knocked out the webs between the holes, and then moved the cusps. Dunn says that archaeology is largely the study of history's tool markers, and archaeologists understand a society's level of advancement with tools and artifacts. The hammer was probably the first tool ever invented, and hammers have forged some elegant and beautiful artifacts ever since man first learned that he could effect profound changes in his environment by applying force with a reasonable degree of accuracy. The development of tools has been a continuous and fascinating aspect of human endeavor. Dunn says that the Great Pyramid leads a long list of artifacts that have been misunderstood and misinterpreted by archaeologists who have promoted theories and methods that are based on a collection of tools that they struggle with to replicate the simple aspects of the work. For the most part, primitive tools that are discovered are considered contemporaneous with the artifacts of the same period, yet during this period in Egyptian history, artifacts were produced in prolific number, with no tools surviving to explain their creation. The ancient Egyptians created artifacts that cannot be explained in simple terms. These tools do not fully represent the state of the art that is evident in the artifacts. There are some intriguing objects that survived after this civilization, and in spite of its most visible and impressive monuments, we have only a sketchy understanding of the full scope of its technology. The tools displayed by Egyptologists as instruments for the creation of many of these incredible artifacts are physically incapable of reproducing them. After standing in awe before these engineering marvels, and then being shown a paltry collection of copper implements in the tool case at the Cairo Museum, one comes away bemused and frustrated. Yeah, somebody's bullshitting. Dunn claims that the British Egyptologist Sir William Flinders Petrie also recognized that these tools were insufficient. He explored this anomaly thoroughly in pyramids and temples of Giza and expressed amazement about the methods the ancient Egyptians used to cut hard igneous rock. He credited them with methods that we are only now coming to understand. Says Dunn, I am not an Egyptologist, I am a technologist. I do not have much interest in who died when, whom they may have taken with them, and where they went to. No lack of respect is intended for the mountain of work and the millions of hours of study conducted on this subject by intelligent scholars, professional and amateur, but my interest, thus my focus, is elsewhere. When I look at an artifact to investigate how it was manufactured, I am not concerned about its history or chronology. Having spent most of my career working with the machinery that actually creates modern artifacts, such as jet engine components, I am able to analyze and determine how an artifact was created. I have also had training and experience in some non-conventional manufacturing methods, such as laser processing and electrical discharge machining. Having said that, I should state that contrary to some popular speculations, I have not seen evidence for laser cutting on the Egyptian rocks. Still, there is evidence for other non-conventional machining methods. You hadn't seen the evidence of laser cutting on the rocks? Okay, well, you ain't been looking hard enough, Bubba. As well as more sophisticated conventional type sawing, lathe and milling practices. Undoubtedly, some of the artifacts that Petrie was studying were produced using lathes. There's also evidence of clearly defined lathe tool marks on some sarcophagi lids. The Cairo Museum contains enough evidence that will prove that the ancient Egyptians used highly sophisticated manufacturing methods once it's properly analyzed. There are several artifacts that almost undeniably indicate machinery power being used by the pyramid builders. These artifacts, scrutinized by William Flinders Petrie, were all fragments of extremely hard igneous rock. These pieces of granite and diorite exhibit marks that are the same as those resulting from cutting hard igneous rock with modern machinery. It is shocking that Petrie's studies of these fragments have not attracted greater attention, for there is unmistakable evidence of machine tooling methods. It will probably surprise many people to know that evidence proving that the ancient Egyptians used tools such as straight saws, circular saws, and even lathes has been recognized for over a century. The lathe is the father of all machine tools in existence, and Petrie submits evidence showing that not only were lathes used by ancient Egyptians, but they performed tasks which would, by today's standards, be considered impossible without highly developed specialized techniques such as cutting concave and convex spherical radii without splintering the material. While digging through the ruins of ancient civilizations, would archaeologists instantly recognize the work of machine tools by the kind of marks made on the material or the configuration of the piece at which they were looking? Fortunately, one archaeologist had the perception and knowledge to recognize such marks, and although at the time Petrie's findings were published, the machining industry was in its infancy, the growth in the industry since then warrants a new look at his findings. Continues Dunn, having worked with copper on numerous occasions and having hardened it in the manner suggested above, this statement struck me as being entirely ridiculous. You could certainly work hardened copper by striking it repeatedly or even by bending it. However, after a specific hardness has been reached, the copper will begin to split and break apart. This is why when working with copper to any great extent, it has to be periodically annealed or softened if you want to keep it in one piece. Even after hardening in such a way, the copper will not be able to cut granite. The hardest copper alloy in existence today is beryllium copper. There is no evidence to suggest that the ancient Egyptians possessed this alloy, but even if they did, this alloy is not hard enough to cut granite. Copper has predominantly been described as the only metal available at the time the Great Pyramid was built. Consequently, it would follow that all work must have sprung from the able use of this basic metallic element. We may be entirely wrong, however, even in the basic assumption that copper was the only metal available to the ancient Egyptians. For another little known fact about the pyramid builders is that they were iron makers as well. Without going back in time and interviewing the craftsmen who worked on the pyramids, we will probably never know for sure what materials their tools were made of. Any debate of the subject would be futile, for until the proof is at hand, no satisfactory conclusion can be reached. However, the manner in which the masons used their tools can be discussed, and perhaps if we compare current methods of cutting granite with the finished product, there may be some basis on which to draw a parallel. Today's granite cutting methods include the use of wire saws and abrasive, usually silicon carbide, which has a hardness comparable with diamond and therefore is hard enough to cut through the quartz crystal in the granite. The wire is a continuous loop that is held by two wheels, one of the wheels being the driver. Between the wheels, which can vary in distance depending on the size of the machine, the granite is being cut by being pushed against the wire or being held firmly and allowing the wire to feed through it. The wire does not cut the granite, but it is designed to effectively hold the silicon carbide grit that does the actual cutting. By looking at the shapes of the cuts that were made in the basalt items 3B and 5B, one could certainly speculate that a wire saw had been used and left its imprint in the rock. The full radius at the bottom of the cut is exactly the shape that would be left by such a saw. Mr. John Barta of the John Barta Company informed me that the wire saws used in quarry mills today cut through granite with great rapidity. Mr. Barta told me that the wire saws with silicon carbide cut through the granite like it is butter. Out of interest, I asked Mr. Barta what he thought of the copper chisel theory, Mr. Barter, possessing an excellent sense of humor, came forth with some jocular remarks regarding the practicality of such an idea. Quote, if the ancient Egyptians had indeed used wire saws for cutting hard rock, were these saws powered by hand or machine? With my experience in machine shops and the countless number of times I've had to use a saw, both hand saws and power saws, there appears to be strong evidence that, in at least some instances, the latter method was used. Sir William Petree's observations bear out what Dunn is saying. The following are his notes on the coffer inside the king's chamber in the Great Pyramid. On the north end of the coffer is a place near the west side where the saw was run too deep into the granite and was backed out again by the masons. But this fresh start they made was still too deep, and 2 inches lower they backed out a second time, having cut out more than 10 inches deeper than what they had intended. The following concerns the coffer inside the second pyramid. The coffer is well polished, not only inside but all over the outside, even though it was nearly all bedded into the floor with blocks plastered against it. The bottom is left rough and shows that it was sawn and afterwards dressed down to the intended height. But in sawing, the saw was run too deep and then backed out. It was therefore not dressed down all over the bottom. The worst part of the sawing being cut 0.20th of an inch deeper than the dress part. This is the only error of workmanship in the whole of it. It is polished all over the sides, in and out, and is not left with the saw lines visible on it like the Great Pyramid coffer. Petree estimated that a pressure of 1 to 2 tons on jewel-tipped bronze saws must have been necessary to cut through the extremely hard granite. If we agree with these estimates, as well as with the methods proposed by Egyptologists regarding the construction of the pyramids, then a severe inequity can be discerned between the two. Says Dunn, so far Egyptologists have not given credence to any speculation that suggests that the builders of the pyramids might have used machines instead of manpower in this massive construction project. In fact, they do not give the pyramid builders the intelligence to have developed and used the simple wheel. It is quite remarkable that a culture which possessed sufficient technical ability to make a lathe and progressed from there to develop a technique that enabled the machine to machine radii in hard diorite would not have thought of the wheel before this. Petree logically assumes that the granite coffers found in the Giza pyramids were marked prior to being cut. The workmen were given a guideline with which to work. The accuracy exhibited in the dimensions of the coffers confirms this, plus the fact that the guidelines of some sort would have been necessary to alert the masons of their error. While no one can say with certainty how the granite coffers were cut, the saw marks in the granite have certain characteristics which suggest that they were not the result of hand sawing. If there was not evidence to the contrary, I might agree that the manufacturing of the granite coffers in the Great Pyramid and the Second Pyramid could quite possibly have been achieved using pure manpower and a tremendous amount of time. It is extremely unlikely that a team of masons operating a 9-foot handsaw would be cutting through hard granite fast enough that they would pass their guideline before noticing the error. To then come back the saw out and repeat the same error as they did on the coffer in the king's chamber does nothing to confirm the speculation that this object was the result of handwork. When I read Petree's passage concerning these deviations, a flood of memories came to me of my own history with saws, both power and manual driven. With these experiences, plus those observed in others, it seems inconceivable to me that manpower is the motivating force behind the saw which cut the granite coffers. While cutting steel with handsaws, an object that has a long work face, and certainly one with such dimensions as the coffers, would not be cut with great rapidity. And the direction the saw may turn can be seen well in advance of a serious mistake being made. The smaller the workpiece, naturally, the faster the blade would cut through it. On the other hand, if the saw is mechanized and is cutting rapidly through the workpiece, the saw could wander from its intended course and cut through the guideline at a certain point at such a speed that the error is made before the condition can be corrected. This is not uncommon. This does not mean that a manually operated saw cannot wander. but that the speed of the operation would determine the efficiency in discovering any deviation that the saw may have had from its intended course. Along with the evidence on the outside, further evidence of the use of high-speed machine tools can be found inside of the granite coffer in the king's chamber. The methods that were evidently used by the pyramid builders to hollow out the inside of the granite coffers are similar to the methods which would have been used today in machines to cut out the inside components. All right, next segment. Inside the king's chamber. Dunn says that the tool marks on the inside of the granite coffer in the king's chamber indicate that when the granite was hollowed out, preliminary roughing cuts were made by drilling holes into the granite around the area which was to be removed. According to Petrie, these drill holes were made with tube drills, which left a central core that had to be knocked away after the hole had been cut. That's interesting, because some of the stones that had been found on the rock wall had these similar type of cuts in them. They're like tool marks, tool marks. And a lot of people assumed that these were made when people were digging out the stones, but they were not, because they were pulled out of the ground in a separate location and already had these round drill-like holes in them. And that's the best way I could describe them, like a tube drill. That's interesting. After all the holes had been drilled and all the cores removed, Petrie surmises that the coffer was then handiworked to its desired dimension. The machinists on this particular piece of granite once again let their tools get the better of them, and the resulting errors are still to be found on the inside of the coffer in the king's chamber. On the east inside is a portion of a tube drill hole remaining where they had tilted the drill over into the side by not working it vertically. They tried hard to polish away all that part and took off about 1/10 of an inch thickness around all of it. But still, they had to leave the side of the hole 1/10 of an inch deep, 3 long, and 1.3 wide at the bottom of it. And it is 8 or 9 below the original top of the coffer. They made a similar error in the north inside, but of a much less extent. There are traces of horizontal grinding lines on the west inside portion. Says Dunn, these errors noted by Petrie are not uncommon in modern machine shops, and I must confess to having made them myself on occasion. Several factors could be involved in creating this condition, although I cannot visualize any one of them being a hand operation. Again, while working their drill into the granite, the machinists had made a mistake before they had time to correct it. And I think that's the key here. You understand why they keep repeating that? I mean, whatever they were using, if there was that much of a mistake, it would have taken so long for them grinding down to get to that point that they wouldn't have grinded, and then got to done with it and went, oh, fuck, we missed our mark. We got to do it again. It wouldn't have happened. Whatever they were cutting with was such of a heat and such intensity that they didn't get their measurements right, and they cut, and it immediately. It had to have been some sort of laser or plasma weapon. Let us speculate for a moment that the drill was being worked by hand. How far into the granite would they be able to cut before the drill had to be removed to permit cleaning the waste out of the hole? Would they be able to drill 8 or 9 inches into the granite without having to remove their drill? It's inconceivable to me that such a depth could be achieved with a hand-operated drill without the frequent withdrawal of the drill to clean out the hole, or provisions being made for the removal of the waste while the drill was still cutting. It is possible, therefore, that the frequent withdrawals of the drill would expose their error, and that they would have noticed the direction their drill was taking before it had cut a .200-inch gouge into the side of the coffer, and before it had reached a depth of 8 or 9 inches. Can't we see the same situation with the drill as we saw with the saw? Here we are having 2 high-speed operations where errors are made before the operators have time to correct them. Although the ancient Egyptians are not given credit for having a simple wheel, the evidence proves that they not only had the wheel, they had a more sophisticated use for it. The evidence of lathe work is remarkably distinct on some of the artifacts housed in the Cairo Museum, as well as those that were studied by Petrie. 2 pieces of diorite in Petrie's collection he identified as being the result of true turning on a lathe. Dunn notes that Petrie did not identify the means by which he inspected the core, whether he had used metrology instruments, a microscope, or the naked eye. He also mentions that all Egyptologists do not universally accept Petrie's conclusions. For instance, in Ancient Egyptian Materials and Industries, author Lucas takes issue with Petrie's conclusion that the grooves were the result of fixed jewel points. In my opinion, to suppose the knowledge of cutting these gemstones to form teeth and of setting them in the metal in such a manner that they would bear the strain of hard use, and to do this at the early period assigned to them would present greater difficulties than those explained by the assumption of their employment. But were there indeed teeth such as postulated by Petrie? The evidence to prove their presence is as follows. A cylindrical core of granite grooved round and round by a graving point, the grooves being continuous and forming a spiral within one part of a single groove. They may be traced 5 rotations round the core. Part of a drill hole in diorite with 17 equisetant grooves due to the point successive rotation of the same cutting point. Another piece of diorite with a series of grooves plowed out to a depth of over 1/100th of an inch in a single cut. And D, other pieces of diorite showing the regular equidistant grooves of a saw. But if an abrasive power had been used with soft copper saws and drills, it is highly probable that the pieces of the abrasive would have been forced into the metal where they might have remained for some time. Any such accidental and temporary teeth would have produced the same effect as intentional and permanent ones. Lucas goes on to speculate that withdrawing the tube drill in order to remove waste and insert fresh grit into the hole created by the grooves. There are problems with this theory. Dunn says that it is doubtful that a simple tool that is being turned by hand will remain turning while the artisans draw it out of the hole. Likewise, placing the tool back into a clean hole with fresh grit would not require that the tool rotate until it was at the work face. There is also the question of the taper on both sides of the hole and the core. But what would effectively provide clearance between the tool and the granite? Ultrasonic machining the granite core. Says Dunn, the most significant detail of the drilled holes and cores studied by Petrie is that the groove is cut deeper through the quartz than the feldspar. Quartz crystals are employed in the production of ultrasonic sound and conversely are responsive to the influence of vibration in the ultrasonic ranges and can be induced to vibrate at high frequency. In machining granite using ultrasonics, the harder material, quartz, would not necessarily offer more resistance as it would during conventional machining practices. An ultrasonically vibrating tool bit would find numerous sympathetic partners while cutting through granite embedded right in the granite itself. Instead of resisting the cutting action, the quartz would be induced to respond and vibrate in sympathy with the high-frequency waves and amplify the abrasive action as the tool cut through it. The fact that there is a groove may be explained several ways. An uneven flow of energy may have caused the tool to oscillate more on one side than the other. The tool may have been improperly mounted. A buildup of abrasive on one side of the tool may have cut the groove as the tool spiraled into the granite. Sorry, I lost my place here. The tapering sides of the hole and the core are perfectly normal when we consider the basic requirements for all types of cutting tools. This requirement is that clearance be provided between the tool's non-matching surfaces and the workpiece instead of having a straight tube. Therefore, we would have a tube with a wall thickness that gradually became thinner along its length. The outside diameter getting gradually smaller, creating clearance between the tool and the hole and the inside diameter getting larger, creating clearance between the tool and the central core. This would allow a free flow of abrasive slurry to reach the cutting area. A tube drill of this design would also explain the tapering of the sides of the hole and the core. By using a tube drill made of softer material than the abrasive, the cutting edge would gradually wear away. The dimensions of the hole, therefore, would correspond to the dimensions of the tool at the cutting edge. As the tool became worn, the hole and the core would reflect this wear in the form of a taper. Dunn claims that with ultrasonic machining, the tool can plunge straight down into the workpiece. It can also be screwed into the workpiece. The spiral groove can be explained if we consider one of the methods that is predominantly used to uniformly advance machine components. The rotational speed of the drill is not a factor in this cutting method. The rotation of the drill is merely a means to advance the drill into the workpiece. Using a screw and nut method, the tube drill could be efficiently advanced in the workpiece by the turning in a clockwise direction. The screw would gradually thread through the nut, forcing the oscillating drill into the granite. It would be the ultrasonically induced motion of the drill that would do the cutting and not the rotation. The latter would only be needed to sustain a cutting action of the workface. By definition, the process is not a drilling process by conventional standards, but a grinding process in which abrasives are caused to impact the material in such a way that a controlled amount of material is removed. Says Dunn, another method by which the grooves could have been created is through the use of a spinning trepanning tool that has been mounted off-center to its rotational axis. Clyde Treadwell of Sonic Mill Incorporated in Albuquerque, New Mexico, explained to me that when an off-center drill rotated into the granite, it would gradually be forced into alignment with the rotational axis of the drilling machine's axis. The grooves, he claims, could be created as the drill was rapidly withdrawn from the hole. If Treadwell's theory is the correct one, it still requires a level of technology that is far more developed and sophisticated than what the ancient pyramid builders are given credit for. This method may be a valid alternative to the theory of ultrasonic machining, even though ultrasonics resolves all the unanswered questions where other theories have fallen short. Methods may have been proposed that might cover a singular aspect of the machine marks and not progress to the method described here. It is when we search for a single method that provides an answer for all the data that we move away from the primitive and even more conventional machining and are forced to consider methods that are somewhat anomalous for that period in history. Granite boxes in rock tunnels. That's the next section here. In February 1995, Dunn joined Graham Hancock and Robert Bivol in Cairo to participate in a documentary. While there, he came across and measured some artifacts produced by the ancient pyramid builders, which proved beyond any shadow of a doubt that highly advanced and sophisticated tools and methods were employed by this ancient civilization. The group were examining artifacts found in the rock tunnels at the Temple of Serapim at Saqqara, the site of the Step Pyramid and Zoser's tomb. Says Dunn, we were in the stifling atmosphere of the tunnels when the dust kicked up by tourists lay heavily in the still air. These tunnels contain 21 granite boxes. Each box weighs an estimated 65 tons. And together with the huge lid that sits on top of them, the total weight of the assembly is around 100 tons. Just inside the entrance of the tunnels, there is a lid that had not been finished, and beyond this lid, barely fitting within the confines of one of the tunnels, is a granite box that had also been rough-hewn. The granite boxes are approximately 13 feet long, 7.5 feet wide, and 11 feet high. They are installed in crypts that were cut out of the limestone bedrock at staggered intervals along the tunnels. The floors of the crypts were about 4 feet below the tunnel floor, and the boxes were set into a recess in the center. Bivol was addressing the engineering aspects of installing such huge boxes within a confined space where the last crypt was located near the end of the tunnel. With no room for the hundreds of slaves pulling on ropes to position these boxes, how were they moved into place? While Hancock and Bavall were filming, I jumped down into a crypt and placed my parallel against the outside surface of the box. It was perfectly flat. I shone the flashlight and found no deviation from a perfectly flat surface. I clambered through a broken-out edge into the inside of another giant box, and again, I was astonished to find it astonishingly flat. I looked for errors. I couldn't find any. I wish at that time that I had the proper equipment to scan the entire surface and ascertain the full scope of the work. Nonetheless, I was perfectly happy to use my flashlight and straight edge and stand in awe of this incredibly precise and incredibly huge artifact. Checking the lid and the surface on which it sat, I found them both to be perfectly flat. It occurred to me that this gave the manufacturers of this piece a perfect seal. Two perfectly flat surfaces pressed together with the weight of one pushing out the air between the two surfaces. The technical difficulties in finishing the inside of this piece made the sarcophagus and Khafra's pyramid seem simple in comparison. Canadian researcher Robert McKenty accompanied me at this time. He saw the significance of the discovery and was filming with his camera. At that moment, I knew how Howard Carter must have felt when he discovered Tutankhamun's tomb. The dust-filled atmosphere in the tunnels made breathing uncomfortable. I could only imagine what it would be like if I was finishing off a piece of granite, regardless of the method used, and how unhealthy it would be. Surely it would have been better to finish the work in the open air. I was so astonished by this find that it didn't occur to me until later that the builders of those relics, for some esoteric reason, intended for them to be ultra-precise. They had taken the trouble to bring into the tunnel the unfinished product and finish it underground for a good reason. It is the logical thing to do if you require a high degree of precision in the piece that you are working on. To finish it with such precision at a site that maintained a different atmosphere and a different temperature, such as in the open under the hot sun, would mean that when it was finally installed in the cool cave-like temperatures of the tunnel, you would lose that precision. The granite would change its shape through thermal expansion and contraction. The solution then, as it is now, of course, is to prepare precision surfaces in the location in which they are going to be housed. This discovery and the realization of its critical importance to the artisans that built it went beyond my wildest dreams of discoveries to be made in Egypt. For a man of my inclination, this was better than King Tut's tomb. The Egyptians' intentions with respect to precision are perfectly clear, but to what end? Further studies of these artifacts should include thorough mapping and inspection with the following tools: a laser interferometer with surface flatness checking capabilities, an ultrasonic thickness gauge to check the thickness of the walls to determine their consistency to uniform thickness, an optical flat with monochromatic light source to see if the surfaces are really finished to optical precision. Dunn contracted 4 precision granite manufacturers in the U.S. and hasn't been able to find one who can do this kind of work. He received a letter from Eric Leither of True Stone Corporation about the technical feasibility of creating several Egyptian artifacts, including the giant granite boxes found in the bedrock tunnels of the Temple of Serapim at Saqqara. The letter read as follows: Dear Christopher, first I would like to thank you for providing me with all the fascinating information. Most people never get the opportunity to take part in something like this. You mentioned to me that the box was derived from one solid block of granite. A piece of granite that size is estimated to weigh 200,000 pounds. If it was Sierra white granite, which weighs approximately 175 pounds per cubic foot, if a piece of that size was available, the cost would be enormous. Just the raw piece of rock would cost somewhere in the area of $115 million. This price does not include cutting the block to size or any freight charges. The next obvious problem would be the transportation. There would be many special permits issued by the Department of Transportation and would cost thousands of dollars. From the information that I gathered from your facts, the Egyptians moved this piece of granite nearly 500 miles. That is an incredible achievement for a society that existed hundreds of years ago. Says Dunn. Eric went on to say that his company did not have the equipment or capabilities to produce the boxes in this manner. He said that his company would create the boxes in 5 pieces, ship them to the customer, and bolt them together on site. Another artifact I inspected was a piece of granite that I quite literally stumbled across while strolling across the Giza Plateau later that day. I concluded after doing preliminary check of this piece that the ancient pyramid builders had to have had used a machine with 3 axes of movement, X, Y, and Z, to guide the tool in 3-dimensional space to create it. Outside of being incredibly precise, normal flat surfaces being simple geometry can justifiably be explained away by simple methods. This piece, though, drives us beyond the question, what tools were used to cut it, to a more far-reaching question, what guided the tools that were used for cutting it? In addressing this question and being comfortable with the answer, it is helpful to have a working knowledge of contour machining. Many of the artifacts that modern civilizations have created would be impossible to produce using simple handiwork. We are surrounded by artifacts that are the result of men and women employing their minds to create tools which overcome physical limitations. We have developed machine tools to create the dies that produce the aesthetic contours on the cars that we drive, the radios we listen to, and the appliances we use. To create the dies to produce these items, a cutting tool has to accurately follow a predetermined contoured path in 3 dimensions. In some applications, it will move in 3 dimensions simultaneously using 3 or more axes of movement. The artifact that I was looking at required a minimum of 3 axes of motion to machine it. When the machine tool industry was relatively young, techniques were employed where the final shape was finished by hand, using templates as a guide. Today, with the use of precision computer numerical control machines, there is little call for handwork. A little polishing to remove unwanted tool marks may be the only handwork required. To know that an artifact has been produced on such a machine, therefore, one would expect to see a precise surface with indications of tool marks that show the path of the tool. This is one I found on the Giza Plateau, lying out in the open south of the Great Pyramid, about 100 yards east of the second pyramid. There are so many rocks of all shapes and sizes lying around this area that, to the untrained eye, this one could easily be overlooked. To a trained eye, it may attract some cursory attention and a brief muse. I was fortunate that it both caught my attention and that I had some tools with which to inspect it. There were 2 pieces laying close together, one larger than the other. They had originally been one piece and had been broken. I found I needed every tool that I had brought with me to inspect it. I was most interested in the accuracy of the contour and its symmetry. What we have is an object that 3-dimensionally as one piece could be compared in shape to a small sofa. The seat is a contour that blends into the walls of the arms and the back. I checked the contour using the profile gauge along 3 axes of its length, starting at the blend radius near the back and ending near the tangency point, which blended smoothly where the contour radius meets the front. The wire radius gauge is not the best way to determine the accuracy of this piece. When adjusting the wires at one position on the block and moving to another position, the gauge could be reseated on the contour. But questions could be raised as to whether the hand that positioned it compensated for some inaccuracy in the contour. However, placing the parallel at several points along and around the axes of the contour, I found the surface to be extremely precise. At one point near a crack in the piece, there was a light showing through, but the rest of the piece allowed very little to show. During this time, I had attracted quite a crowd. It's difficult to traverse the Giza Plateau at the best of times without getting attention from the camel drivers, donkey riders, and purveyors of trinkets. It wasn't long after I had pulled the tools out of my backpack that I had 2 willing helpers, Mohammed and Mustafa, who weren't at all interested in compensation. At least that's what they told me, but I can honestly say that I lost my shirt on that adventure. Yeah, that's what they tell you. Oh, no, we don't want any money, man. No. And they end up fucking robbing your ass. I had cleaned sand and dirt out of the corner of the larger block and washed it out with water. I used a white T-shirt that I was carrying in my backpack to wipe the corner out so I could get an impression of it forming wax. Mustafa talked me into giving him the shirt before I left. I was so inspired by what I had found that I tossed it to him. Muhammad held the wire gauge at different points along the contour while I took photographs of it. I then took the forming wax and heated it with a match, kindly provided by the Movenpick Hotel, and then pressed it into the corner blend radius. I shaved off the splayed part and positioned it at different points around Muhammad as he held the wax still while I took photographs. By this time, there was an old camel driver and a policeman on a horse looking on. What I discovered... Excuse me. What I discovered with the wax was a uniform radius tangential with the contour, the back, and the sidewall. When I returned to the U.S., I measured the wax using a radius gauge and found that it was a true radius measuring 7/16 of an inch. The sidearm blend radius has a design feature that is a common engineering practice today. By cutting a relief at the corner, a mating part that is to match or butt up against the surface with the large blend radius may have a smaller radius. This feature provides for a more efficient machining operation because it allows a cutting tool with a large diameter and therefore a large radius to be used. With greater rigidity in the tool, more material can be removed when making a cut. I believe there is more, much more, than can be gleaned using these methods of study. I believe the Cairo Museum contains many artifacts that, when properly analyzed, will lead to the same conclusion that I have drawn from this piece. And we're going to stop right there for tonight because the next section is pretty long. High-speed motorized machinery must have been used. So, all right, high-speed motorized machinery must have been used. Says Dunn in conclusion, the use of high-speed motorized machinery and what we might call modern techniques in non-conventional machining and manufacturing the granite artifacts found at Giza and other locations in Egypt warrants serious study by qualified, open-minded people who could approach the subject without preconceived notions. In terms of a more thorough understanding of the level of technology employed by the ancient pyramid builders, the implications of these discoveries are tremendous. We are not only presented with hard evidence that seems to have eluded us for decades and which provides further evidence proving the ancients to be advanced, we are also provided with an opportunity to reanalyze everything from a different perspective. Understanding how something is made opens up a different dimension when trying to determine why it was made. The precision in these artifacts is irrefutable. Even if we ignore the question of how they were produced, we are still faced with a question of why such precision was needed. Revelation of new data invariably raises new questions in this case. It's understandable to hear, where are the machines? Machines are tools. The question should be applied universally and can be asked of anyone who believes other methods may have been used. The truth is that no tools have been found to explain any theory on how the pyramids were built or how the granite boxes were cut. More than 80 pyramids have been discovered in Egypt, and the tools that built them have never been found. Even if we accepted the notion that copper tools are capable of producing these incredible artifacts, the few copper implements that have been uncovered do not represent the number of such tools that would have been used if every stonemason who worked on the pyramids at just the Giza site owned one or two of them. In the Great Pyramid alone, there are an estimated 2,300,000 blocks of stone, both limestone and granite, weighing between 2 tons and 70 tons each. That is a mountain of evidence that there are no tools surviving to explain its creation. The principle of Occam's razor, where the simplest means of manufacturing holds force until proven inadequate, has guided my attempt to understand the pyramid builders' methods. With Egyptologists, there is one component of this principle that has been lacking. The simplest methods do not satisfy the evidence, and they have been reluctant to consider other, less simple methods. There is little doubt that the capabilities of the ancient pyramid builders have been seriously underestimated. The most distinct evidence that I can relate is the precision and mastery of machining technologies that have been only recognized in recent years. Some technologies the Egyptians possess still astound modern artisans and engineers primarily for this reason. The development of machine tools has been intrinsically linked with the availability of consumer goods and the desire to find a customer. One reference point for judging a civilization to be advanced has been our current state of manufacturing evolution. Manufacturing is the manifestation of all scientific and engineering efforts. For over 100 years, industry has progressed exponentially. Since Petrie first made his critical observations, between 1880 and 1882, our civilization has leapt forward at breakneck speed to provide the customer with goods, all created by artisans, and still, over 100 years after Petrie, these artisans are utterly astounded by the achievements of the ancient pyramid builders. They are astounded not so much by what they perceive a society is capable of using primitive tools, but by comparing these prehistoric artifacts with their own current level of expertise and technological advancement. The interpretation and understanding of a civilization's level of technology should not hinge on the preservation of a written record of every technique that they had developed. The nuts and bolts of our society do not always make good copy, and a stone mural will more than likely be cut to convey an ideological message rather than the technique used to inscribe it. Records of the technology developed by our modern civilization rest in media that is vulnerable and could conceivably cease to exist in the event of a worldwide catastrophe such as a nuclear war or another ice age. Consequently, after several thousand years, an interpretation of an artisan's methods may be more than accurate as an interpretation of his language. The language of science and technology doesn't have the same freedom as speech. So even though the tools and machines have not survived the thousands of years since their use, we have to assume by objective analysis of the evidence that they did exist. There's much to be learned from our distant ancestors if only we can open our minds and accept that another civilization from a distant epoch may have developed manufacturing techniques that are as great or perhaps even greater than our own. As we assimilate new data and new views of old data, it is wise to heed the advice Petrie gave to an American who visited him during his research at Giza. The American expressed a feeling that he had been to a funeral after hearing Petrie's findings, which had evidently shattered some favorite pyramid theory of the time. Petrie said, "By all means, let the old theories have a decent burial, though we should take care that in our haste none of the wounded ones are buried alive." With such a convincing collection of artifacts that prove the existence of precision machinery in ancient Egypt, the idea that the Great Pyramid was built by an advanced civilization that inhabited the earth thousands of years ago becomes more admissible. I'm not proposing that this civilization was more advanced technologically than ours on all levels. Well, you should be, because that's what it was. But it does appear that as far as masonry work and construction are concerned, they were exceeding current capabilities and specifications. Making routine work of precision machining huge pieces of extremely hard igneous rock is astonishingly impressive. Considered logically, the pyramid builder civilization must have developed their knowledge in the same manner any civilization would, and had reached their state-of-the-art through technological progress over many years. As of this writing, there is much research being conducted by many professionals throughout the world. These people are determined to find answers to the many unsolved mysteries, indicating that our planet Earth has supported other advanced civilizations in the distant past. And I don't doubt that for a second either, but the you have to also entertain the idea that this technology advanced and came to fruition somewhere else, some other place other than Earth, and then was brought here to Earth. I don't have any doubt that there are ancient civilizations going back thousands and thousands of years that had technology beyond what we even have in the modern day. But did it originate on Earth originally, or did it come here from somewhere else? Again, as he stated here, without any evidence to prove that it did come from people here on Earth, we have to assume that it's at least a possibility that this technology came from other places and was introduced here. I mean, the Sumerian texts talk about that extensively. They talk about certain animals and certain plants being brought here for food purposes. In fact, that's that's what solves the whole riddle. Humans have always been perplexed with the riddle of which came first, the chicken or the egg, right? Because who laid the egg for the chicken to be hatched out of if there wasn't, a chicken there first? You can't explain the riddle. Well, you can explain the riddle because that animal was introduced into our environment as a foodstuffs. The Great Pyramid and the Mighty Crystal. How then can we design an object to respond sympathetically with the Earth's vibration? How do we utilize that electricity and that energy? How could we turn it into usable electricity? If we could somehow utilize this energy, it would possibly be the greatest invention in the world. Well, that's what I think the rock wall is. That's exactly what it is. It resonates with frequencies and vibrations, and that resonation and frequency and vibration produces energy. That's why these copper rings and these metal rings that were found in the wall that date to over 7,000 years old. There's pictures of them in my little trailer for the film there at the website. And when they were found in the wall, John Lindsay said that they looked as if they looked like modern day wall wart, like plugs, sockets in the wall that you would plug something into. And with the piezoelectrical properties of this rock wall, and of course the fact that it has a higher magnetic signature than the Earth does, and the evidence of the tractors on top of it vibrating and shaking violently as if they were going to fly off. It's definitely, I think that's probably one of the reasons why they want it kept covered up. Because if we can really uncover this rock wall, and that's why I think it's so important that we have a rock wall dig, it very well could be that we uncover this ancient energy-producing structure that could then possibly be recreated and used to create possibly free energy. And I think this is, again, one of the secrets they've kept on the shelf for years, going back, to the suppression of Tesla and other inventors, on and on and on. We must, first of all, understand what a transducer is. Early on, we discussed the piezoelectric effect vibration has on quartz crystal. And again, rock wall, tons of quartz crystal. Alternately compressing and releasing the quartz produces electricity. Microphones and other modern electronic devices work on this principle as well. Speak into a microphone, and the sound of your voice, the mechanical vibration, is converted into electrical impulses. The reverse happens with a speaker, where electrical impulses are converted into mechanical vibrations. It has also been speculated that quartz-bearing rock creates the phenomenon known as ball lightning. The quartz crystal is the transducer. It transforms one form of energy into another. Understanding the source of the energy and having the means to tap into it, all we need to do is convert the unlimited mechanical stresses therein and usable electricity utilizing quartz crystals. Oh! So the pressure of these being put together, that's why the walls in the rock wall look so compacted. And that's why they're made of all these geopolymers and all of these rare earth metals put together. That's why they had this connection together, because when they're compressed and accessed, they produce energy. Now I understand why this guy Dunn, who's writing all this stuff that we're reading here, I understand now why he was at the original dig. If you watch my preview of the Lost Secrets part where I talk about John Lindsay, and you see John Lindsay there at the original dig they had in '99. You'll see Dunn is one of the people there in that scene that's in my little preview. He was there. And I always wondered for years why he was there. And, well, now after reading this, I know why. The Great Pyramid was a geomechanical power plant that responded sympathetically with the Earth's vibrations and converted that energy into electricity. They used the electricity to power their civilization, which included machine tools with which they shaped hard, igneous rock. Okay, you may say, how does this power plant work? It's all very well to throw out a broad statement like that, which rationalizes your own theory on machining, but we need more facts and proof that what has been stated is more than an interesting and radical theory. It has to have proof based on truth or fact. Well, let's start with the power crystal or transducers. It just so happens that the transducers for this power plant are an integral part of the construction that is designed to resonate in harmony with the pyramid itself and also the Earth. The King's Chamber, in which a procession of visitors have noted unusual effects, and in which Tom Danley directed the infrasonic vibrations of the Earth, is in itself a mighty transducer. In any machine, there are devices that function to make the machine work. This machine was no different. Though the inner chambers and passages of the Great Pyramid seem to be devoid of what we would consider to be mechanical or electrical devices, there are devices still housed there that are similar in nature to mechanical devices created today. These devices could also be considered to be electrical devices in that they have the ability to convert or transduce mechanical energy into electrical energy. You might think of other examples as the evidence becomes more apparent. The devices which have resided inside of the Great Pyramid since it was built have not been recognized for what they truly are. Nevertheless, they were an integral part of this machine's function. The granite out of which this chamber is constructed is an igneous rock containing silicone quartz crystals. This particular granite, which was brought from the Aswan quarries, contains 55% or more quartz crystal. Work by two scientists, D.J. Nelson and David H. Coville, shows a special significance in the stone the builders chose in building the King's Chamber. They write, this means that the lining of the King's Chamber, for instance, are literally hundreds of tons of microscopic quartz particles. The particles are hexagonal by pyramidal or rhombohedral in shape. Rhomboid crystals are six-sided prisms with quadrangle sides that present a parallelogram on any side of the six facets. And this is why, well, you ever seen Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon cover, and you've got like the pyramid and the prism and then light going through it. And you see all that's kind of what that's hinting at there. This guarantees that embedded within the granite rock is a high percentage of quartz fragments whose surfaces, by the law of natural averages, are parallel on the upper and lower sides. Additionally, any plasticity of the granite aggregate would allow a piezo tension upon these parallel surfaces and cause an electromotive flow. The great mass of stone above the pyramid chambers presses downward by gravitational force upon the granite walls, thereby converting them into perpetual electric generators. The inner chambers of the Great Pyramid have been generating electrical energy since their construction 46 centuries ago. A man within the King's Chamber would thus come within a weak but definite induction field. Dunn comments that while Nelson and Coville have made an interesting observation and speculation regarding the granite inside the pyramid, I am not sure that they are correct in stating that the pressure of thousands of tons of masonry would generate an electromotive flow in the granite. The pressure on the quartz would need to be alternatively pressed and released in order for electricity to flow. The pressure they are describing would be static, and while it would undoubtedly squeeze the quartz to some degree, the electron flow would cease after the pressure came to rest. Well, in the rock wall, that's why you have this load bearing built into it. It's built to withstand a massive heavy load without crumbling or falling over. And that would, as he stated right there, would keep the electrons flowing because the pressure would never come to rest because it's constantly compacted. Quartz crystal does not create energy, it just converts one kind of energy into another. Needless to say, this point in itself leads to some interesting observations regarding the characteristics of the granite complex. David Hatcher Childress's Technology of the Gods, the acoustics of the Great Pyramid, is where we're picking up off for you here tonight. One key to Dunn's theory of the Giza power plant is the acoustics of the Great Pyramid. Above the King's Chamber are 5 rows of granite beams, making a total of 43 beams weighing up to 70 tons each. Each layer is separated by a space large enough to crawl into. The red granite beams are cut square and parallel on 3 sides, but were left seemingly untouched on the top surface, which was rough and uneven. Some of them even had holes gouged into the top of them. And as I've mentioned, you can see in my little trailer for the Lost Secrets of Ancient America, Volume 1, the Sanders Stone, not the Sanders Stone, but there was one of the family's names of the stones that were found from the rock wall, and they had some of those same gouged holes in the stones. You can see those towards the end of my little 4-minute preview up there on my website. In cutting these giant monoliths, the builders evidently found it necessary to treat the beams destined for the uppermost chamber with the same respect as those intended for the ceiling directly above the King's Chamber. Each beam was cut flat and square on 3 sides, with the top side seemingly untouched. This is interesting, considering that the ones directly above the King's Chamber would be the only ones visible to those entering the pyramid. Even so, the attention these granite ceiling beams received was nonetheless inferior to the attention commanded by the granite out of which the walls were constructed. William Flinders Petrie writes, "The roofing beams are not of polished granite, as they have been described. On the contrary, they have rough-dressed surfaces, very fair and true so far as they go, but without any pretense to polish." And from his observations of the granite inside the King's Chamber, Petrie continues with those of the upper chambers. All of the chambers over the King's Chamber are floored with horizontal beams of granite, rough-dressed on the undersides which form the ceilings, but wholly unwrought above. Says Dunn, "It is remarkable that the builders would exert the same amount of effort in finishing the 34 beams, which would not be seen once the pyramid was built, as they did the 9 beams forming the ceiling of the King's Chamber, which would have been seen. Even if these beams were imperative to the strength of the complex, deviations in accuracy would surely be allowed, making the cutting of the blocks less time-consuming. Unless, of course, they were either using these upper beams for a specific purpose or were using standardized machinery methods that produce parts with little variation." Now we're getting somewhere. Again, the evidence to me is overwhelming that whoever built the Great Pyramids and built these ancient structures had done it many times before. That's the thing that always gets left out of the conversation, I think, when it comes to Egyptology or any kind of this ancient archaeology in any of these ancient sites. You know, if you have one example of something, if you have one Egypt with that precision, these guys just didn't pull this out of their ass overnight and just build this. It was built with a precision. It was built by somebody who had done it somewhere else beforehand. But without the evidence of that beforehand building, people don't think it's even possible. Well, I'm telling you right now, these guys that built this thing had done it before. They knew what the hell they were doing. This wasn't their first shot. Traditional theory has it that the granite beam served to relieve pressure on the chamber and allowed this chamber to be built with a flat ceiling. I disagree. The pyramid builders knew about and were already utilizing a design feature that was structurally sound on a lower level inside the pyramid. If we look at the cantilevered arch ceiling of the Queen's Chamber, we can see that it has more masonry piled on top of it than the King's Chamber. The question could be asked, therefore, that if the builders had wanted to put a flat ceiling in this chamber, wouldn't they have only needed to add one layer of beams? For instance, the distance between the walls, a single layer of beams in the Queen's Chamber, like the 43 granite beams above the King's Chamber, would be supporting no more than their own weight. This leads me to ask, why 5 layers of these beams? To include so many monolithic blocks of granite in the structure is redundant, especially when we consider the amount of incredible difficult work that must have been invested in quarrying, cutting, transporting them 500 miles from the Aswan quarries, and then raising them to the 175-foot level of the pyramid. There is surely another reason for such an enormous effort and investment of time. The 43 giant beams above the king's chamber were not included in the structure to relieve the king's chamber from excessive pressure from above, but were included to fulfill a more advanced purpose. A simple yet refined technology can be discerned in the granite complex at the heart of the Great Pyramid, and with this technology, the ancient power plant operated. The giant granite beams above the king's chamber would be considered to be 43 individual bridges. Like the Tacoma Narrows Bridge, each one is capable of vibrating if a suitable type and amount of energy is introduced. If we were to concentrate on forcing just one of the beams to oscillate, with each of the other beams tuned to that frequency or a harmonic of that frequency, the other beams would be forced to vibrate at the same frequency or a harmonic. It's like a guitar string. If the energy contained within the forcing frequency was great enough, the transfer of energy from one beam to the next could affect the entire series of beams. Yeah, sympathetic. Sympathetic vibration. You'll find that on a guitar string. You pluck a guitar string, and you hit a certain frequency and fret a certain frequency, you'll get a sympathetic vibration out of a closest string. A situation could exist, therefore, in which one individual beam in the ceiling directly above the king's chamber could directly influence another beam in the uppermost chamber by forcing it to vibrate at the same frequency as the original forcing frequency or one of its harmonic frequencies. The amount of energy absorbed by these beams from the source would depend on the natural resonant frequency of the beam. The ability of the beams to dissipate the energy they are subject to would have to be considered, as well as the natural resonating frequency of the granite beam. If the forcing frequency, the sound input, coincided with the natural frequency of the beam, and there was little dampening, then the transfer of energy would be maximized. Consequently, so would the vibration of the beams. It is quite clear that the giant granite beams above the king's chamber would have a length of 17 feet, in which they can react to induced motion and vibrate without restraint. Some dampening may occur if the beam's adjacent faces are so close that they rub together. However, if the beams vibrate in unison, it is possible that such dampening would not happen. To perfect the ability of the 43 granite beams to resonate with the forcing frequency, the natural frequency of each beam would have to be of the same frequency as the forcing frequency or be in harmony with it. That's why they use the same size granite beams, and that's why it had to be the same. Tuned granite beams. Dunn asserts it would be possible to tune a length of granite such as those found in the Great Pyramid by altering its physical dimensions. A precise frequency could be attained by either altering the length of the beam which is allowed to vibrate, as in the playing of stringed instruments, or by removing material from the beam's mass, as in the tuning of bells. A bell is tuned to a fundamental hum and its harmonics by removing metal from critical areas. Striking it while it was being held in a position similar to that of the beams above the king's chamber, as one would strike a tuning fork, could induce oscillation of the beam. The frequency of the vibration would be sampled and more material removed until the correct frequency had been reached. Rather than a lack of attention, therefore, the top surfaces of these granite beams may have arrived at their present shape through the application of more careful attention and work than the sides or the bottom. Before being placed inside the Great Pyramid, each beam may have been suspended on each end in the same position that it would hold once placed inside the Great Pyramid, and a considerable amount of attention paid to the upper surface. Each granite beam was shaped and gouged on the top side as it was tuned. Thousands of tons of granite were actually tuned to resonate in harmony with the fundamental frequency of the earth and the pyramid. Now I understand why this guy was in Rockwall. The granite beams above the king's chamber resemble what a granite beam might look like after it has been tuned in such a manner. After cutting 3 sides square and true to each other, the remaining side could have been cut and shaped until it reached a specific resonating frequency. The removal of material on the upper side of the beam would take into consideration the elasticity of the beam, as a variation of elasticity in the beam might result in more material being removed at one point along the beam's length than another. The fact that the beams above the King's Chamber are all shapes and sizes would support this speculation. In some of the granite beams, it wouldn't be surprising to find holes gouged out of the granite as the tuners worked on trouble spots. Piazzi Smythe, who also comments on these markings in his classic book, The Great Pyramid, these markings, moreover, have only been discovered in those dark holes or hollows, the so-called chambers, but much rather hollows of construction, broken into by Colonel Howard Weiss above the King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid. There also you see other traces of the steps of mere practical work, such as the bat holes in the stones, by which the heavy blocks were doubtless lifted to their place and everything is left perfectly rough. Rather than holes used for lifting the blocks into place, William Flinders Petrie speculates on another reason for Smythe's so-called bat holes. The flooring of the top chamber has large holes in it, evidently enough to hold the butt ends of beams which supported the sloping of roof blocks during the building. Dunn comments, another reason for the holes gouged in the beams near the end of the beams may have been to provide feedback into the center of the beam instead of transferring vibration into the core masonry. Although we must consider that both reasons given for the bat holes may be possible explanations for their existence, it does not preclude other possibilities which have yet to be considered. According to Boris Said, who was with Tom Danley when he conducted his tests, the King's Chamber resonated at a fundamental frequency, and the entire structure of the King's Chamber reinforced this frequency by producing dominant frequencies that created an F-sharp chord. Using large amplifiers, F-sharp is the frequency that is in harmony with the earth. Said claimed that the Indian shamans tuned their ceremonial flutes to F-sharp because it is the frequency that is sacred to Mother Earth. Testing for frequency, Tom Danley placed accelerometers in the spaces above the King's Chamber, but I don't know whether he went as far as checking the frequency of each beam. Said said something in his interview with Art Bell that may be some indication of where Danley was heading with his research. He said that the beams above the King's Chamber were like baffles in a speaker. Further research would need to be conducted before any assertion could be made as to the relationship these holes may have had with tuning those beams to a specific frequency. However, when we consider the characteristics of the entire granite complex, along with the other features found in the Great Pyramid, it seems clear that the results of this research will be along the lines of what I am theorizing. Without confirmation that the granite beams were carefully tuned to respond to a precise frequency, I will infer that such a condition exists in light of what is found in the area. While I have not found any specific record of anyone striking the beams above the King's Chamber and measuring their resonant frequencies, there has been quite a lot written about the resonating qualities of the coffer inside the chamber itself. The coffer is said to resonate at 438 hertz and is at resonance with the resonant frequency of the chamber. This is easily tested and has been noted by numerous visitors to the Great Pyramid, including myself. Another interesting discovery was made by the SCORE expedition. This is a preliminary report told to Art Bell by Boris Said, but it was noted that the floor of the King's Chamber does not sit on solid rock. Not only is the entire granite complex surrounded by massive limestone walls with a space between the granite and the limestone, the floor itself sits on what is characterized as corrugated-shaped rock. It's no wonder the entire chamber rings while walking around inside. Note also that the walls of the chamber do not sit on the granite floor, but are supported outside and 5 inches below the floor level. The granite complex inside the Great Pyramid, therefore, is poised, ready to convert vibrations from the earth into electricity. What is lacking is a sufficient amount of energy to drive the beams and activate the piezoelectric properties within. The ancients, though, had anticipated the need for more energy than what would be collected only within the king's chamber. They had determined that they needed to tap into the vibrations of the earth over a larger area inside the pyramid and deliver that energy to the power center, the king's chamber, thereby substantially increasing the amplitude of the oscillations in the granite. While modern research into architectural acoustics might predominantly focus upon minimizing the reverberation effects of sound in enclosed spaces, there is reason to believe that the ancient pyramid builders were attempting to achieve the opposite. The Grand Gallery, which is considered to be an architectural masterpiece, is an enclosed space in which resonators were installed in the slots along the ledge that runs the length of the gallery. As the Earth's vibration flowed through the Great Pyramid, the resonators converted the energy to airborne sound. By design, the angles and surfaces of the walls and ceiling of the Grand Gallery caused reflection of the sound and its focus into the king's chamber. Although the king's chamber was also responding to the energy flowing through the pyramid, much of the energy would flow past it. The design and utility of the Grand Gallery was to transfer the energy flowing through a large area of the pyramid into the resonant king chamber. This sound was then focused into the granite resonating cavity at sufficient amplitude to drive the granite ceiling beams to oscillation. These beams in turn compelled the beams above them to resonate in harmonic sympathy. Thus, the input sound and the maximization of resonance, the entire granite complex in effect became a vibrating mass of energy. And again, these same qualities are found in the rock wall, folks. You know, if we can get a dig going, and I can get this first film funded and made, and we get the dig going, and we can get what nobody else has gotten yet, hard video evidence proof of this piezoelectrical properties of the rock wall and also its acoustical properties as well. We can get documented proof of this, folks, and show the correlation between that and the Great Pyramid. We're going to do something nobody else on this planet has done yet. And that's why you need to help us out and be a part of this project and help us get this going. When I told you this was going to be earth moving, I meant it. I meant literally earth moving. The acoustic qualities of the design of the upper chambers of the Great Pyramid have been referenced and confirmed by numerous visitors since the time of Napoleon, whose men discharged their pistols at the top of the Grand Gallery and noted that the explosion reverberated into the distance like rolling thunder. Striking the coffer inside the king's chamber results in a deep, bell-like sound of incredible and eerie beauty. And it has been a practice over the years for the Arab guides to demonstrate this resonating sound to the tourists they guide through the pyramid. The sound was included on Paul Horn's album, Inside the Great Pyramid, after being advised of the significant pitch produced by the coffer when it has been struck, and the response of the chamber to this pitch, Horn brought along a device which would give him the exact pitch and frequency. Horn tuned his flute to this tone, which was emitted, which turned out to be 438 cycles per second. In a fascinating booklet about his experiences at the Great Pyramid, Horn describes phenomena concerning the acoustic qualities of the inner chambers. The moment had arrived. It was time to play my flute. I thought of Ben Petish from Santa Rosa, California, a man who had told Mr. Horn about the pitch of the coffer and his suggestions to strike the coffer. I leaned over and hit the inside with the fleshy part of the side of my wrist, and a beautiful round tone was immediately produced. What a resonance. I remember him also saying, when you hear that tone, you will be poised in history that is ever present. I took the electronic tuning device I had brought along in one hand and struck the coffer again with the other, and there it was, A438, just as Ben had predicted. I tuned up to this pitch and was ready to begin. The album opens with these events so that you can hear all these things for yourself. What's the name of that guy's stuff again? Paul Horn, Inside the Great Pyramid. Okay. I'll try to remember that. Dunn says that it appears that the coffer inside the I just read that. No, did I? Did I leave off? Oh, here it is. After noting the eerie qualities of the King and Queen's chambers, Paul Horn went out into the great step at the top of the Grand Gallery to continue his sound test. The Grand Gallery, he reported, sounded rather flat compared with other chambers. He heard something remarkable at this time. He heard the music he was playing coming back to him clearly and distinctly from the King's chamber. The sound was going out into the Grand Gallery and was being reflected through the passageway and reverberating inside of the King's chamber. Dunn says that it appears that the coffer inside the King's chamber was specifically tuned to a precise frequency, and that the room itself was scientifically engineered to be a resonator of that frequency. Perhaps these observations will finally provide an answer to a mystery that William Flinders Petrie had puzzled over at great length. His discovery of a flint pebble under the coffer after he raised it did not strike him as being unimportant for reasons he describes in the pyramids and the temples of Giza. The flint pebble had been put under the coffer. That the pebble had been put under the coffer is important. If any person wished at present to prop the coffer up, there are multitudes of stone chips in the pyramid ready to hand. Therefore, fetching a pebble from the outside seems to show that the coffer was first lifted at a time when no breakages had been made in the pyramid, and there were no chips lying about. This suggests that there was some means of access to the upper chambers, which are always available by removing loose blocks without any forcing. If the stones at the top of the shaft leading from the subterranean part to the gallery had been cemented in place, they must have been smashed to break through them, or if they were granite portilices in the antechamber, they must also have been destroyed, and it is not likely that any person would take the trouble to fetch a large flint pebble in the innermost part of the pyramid if there were stone chips lying in his path. Dunn says it is possible that the flint pebble was placed underneath the coffer at the time of the building, and that the pebble served a purpose for those who placed it there. The alternative answer that there was free access to the upper chambers cannot be supported by fact, and even if it was, we are still faced with the question of why someone found it necessary to prop up the coffer. However, if we had just manufactured an object like the coffer and had it tuned to vibrate at a precise frequency, we would know that to sit flat on the floor would dampen the vibration somewhat. So, by raising one end of the coffer onto the pebble, it could vibrate at peak efficiency. Another unique feature which needs to be confirmed by on-site inspection is the ratchet-style roofline. The problem with coming up with an accurate calculation of the true angle of the overlapping stones is that there is conflicting data from the only two researchers that I have found paying these overlaps any close attention. However, preliminary calculations are interesting to say the least. The angle of the Grand Gallery is 26.3 degrees. Smythe measured the height of the Grand Gallery and found that it varied between 333.9 inches and 346.0 inches. The overlaps are estimated to have approximately a 12-inch tilt. Smythe counted 36 overlaps in the 1,844.5 inches length of the roof. The surface of the overlapping tones in the roof line is close to a 45-degree angle from a vertical plane. 135 degrees polar coordinates, giving that the ends of the gallery are 90 degrees. With this tilt of the roof tiles, a sound wave traveling vertically to the roof would be reflected off the tiles at a 90-degree angle and travel in the direction of the King's chamber. This gives another report, which didn't receive much attention, more pertinence. It has been reported that Al-Mamun's men had to break a false floor out of the gallery. As they broke one stone out, another slid down in its place. It's a sketchy bit of information that would require further research. Al-Mamun's men were tearing out so much limestone that little attention was given to this. However, it should be kept in mind that there may have been a ratchet-style tiled floor in this gallery, that matched the roof. Much of the stone that Al-Memon cut out of the ascending passage was dropped down the descending passage. Later, explorers such as Cavilliga, Davison, and Petrie eventually cleared this passage of all debris, and most of this debris was dumped on the traditional rubbish pit on the north and east side of the Great Pyramid. Petrie reports finding inside the Great Pyramid a prism-shaped stone that had a half-round groove running its length. He also found in the descending passage a block of granite that was 20.6 inches thick, with a section of tubular drilled hole cut through the thickness on one edge. Where this granite came from and for what purpose it was used in the Great Pyramid was a mystery to Petrie. With more significant findings to attract attention, though, it's not surprising these details weren't given much consideration. Dunn says that it is possible to confirm that the Grand Gallery indeed reflected the work of an acoustical engineer using only its dimensions. The disappearance of the gallery resonators is easily explained, even though this structure was only accessible through a tortuously constricted shaft. The original design of the resonators will always be open to question. However, there is one device that performs in a manner that is necessary to respond sympathetically with vibrations. There is no reason that similar devices cannot be created today. There are many individuals who possess the necessary skills to recreate this equipment. All right. So that's the end of that chapter. The next chapter is entitled The Helmholtz Resonator and the Grand Gallery Resonator. So we're David Hatcher Childress' Technology of the Gods, the Helmholtz Resonator and the Grand Gallery Resonators. According to Dunn, a Helmholtz resonator would respond to vibrations coming from within the Earth and actually maximize the transfer of energy. The Helmholtz resonator is made of a round hollow sphere with a round opening that has 1/10 to 1/5 the diameter of the sphere. The size of the sphere determines the frequency at which it will resonate. If the resonant frequency of the resonator is in harmony with a vibrating source, such as a tuning fork, it will draw energy from the fork and resonate at a greater amplitude than the fork will without its presence. It forces the fork to greater energy output than what is normal. Unless the energy of the fork is replenished, the fork will lose its energy quicker than it normally would without the Helmholtz resonator, but as long as the source continues to vibrate, the resonator will continue to draw energy from it at a greater rate. Dunn says that the Helmholtz resonator is normally made out of metal that can be made out of other materials. Holding these resonators in place inside the gallery are members that are keyed into the structure by first being installed into the slots and then held in the vertical position with shot pins that locate in the groove that runs the length of the gallery. Dunn now thinks that the material for these members could have been wood, as trees are probably the most efficient responders to natural earth sounds. There are trees that, by virtue of their internal structure, such as cavities, are known to emit sounds or hum. Modern concert halls are designed and built to interact with the instruments performing within. They are huge musical instruments in and of themselves. The Great Pyramid can be seen as a huge material instrument that is musical, with each element designed to enhance the performance of the other. To choose natural materials, especially in the function of resonating devices, would be a natural and logical decision to make. The qualities of wood cannot be synthesized. The strange basalt vases of the Cairo Museum may be the resonators that Dunn is looking for. One of the most remarkable feats of machining can be found inside the Cairo Museum. I have stood in awe before the stone jars and bowls that are finely machined and perfectly balanced. The schist bowl with 3 lobes folded toward the center hub is an incredible piece of work. With the application of ultrasonics and sophisticated machinery, I can understand how they could be made, but the purpose for doing so has long escaped me. It seems like a tremendous amount of work to go to just to create a domestic vessel. Perhaps these stone artifacts, of which there were over 1,000 found at Saqqara, were used in some way to convert vibration into airborne sound. Are these vessels the Helmholtz resonators we are looking for? The enigmatic antechamber has been the subject of much consternation and discussion. Ludwig Borchardt, director of the German Institute in Cairo, forwarded one proposal for its use in 1925. Borchardt's theory proposed that a series of stone slabs were slid into place after Khufu had been entombed. He theorized that the half-ground grooves in the granite wainscoting supported wooden beams that served as windlasses to lower the blocks. Borchardt may not have been far off with his analysis of the mechanism that was contained within the antechamber. After building the resonators and installing them inside the Grand Gallery, we would want to focus into the King's Chamber sound of a specific frequency, i.e. a pure tone or harmonic chord. We would be assured of doing so if we installed an acoustic filter between the Grand Gallery and the King's Chamber. By installing baffles inside the antechamber, sound waves traveling from the Grand Gallery through the passageway into the King's Chamber would be filtered as they pass through, allowing only a single frequency or harmonic of that frequency to enter the resonant King's Chamber. Sound wave lengths not coinciding with the dimensions between the baffles are filtered out, thereby ensuring that only no interference sound waves enter the resonant King's Chamber, a condition that would reduce the output of the system. To explain the half-round grooves on one side of the chamber and the flat surface on the other, we could speculate that when the installation of these baffles took place, they received a final tuning or tweaking. This may have been accomplished by using cams. By rotating these cams, the off-centered shaft would raise or lower the baffles until the throughput of sound was maximized. A slight movement may have been all that was necessary. Yeah, it's like flying speaker cabinets. He made the analogy of a concert hall earlier. That's the same thing they do in concert halls, where they have, concerts, rock concerts, and everything else. They use these baffles to hang the main speakers in the air, and then by turning them in different directions, they can then cause an entire arena or concert hall to fill up with sound no matter where you're standing. It's the same exact usage. Maximum throughput is accomplished when the ceiling of the first part of the passageway from the Grand Gallery, the ceiling of the passageway leading from the acoustic filter to the resonant King's Chamber, and the bottom surface of each baffle are in alignment. The shaft suspending the baffles would have been locked into place in a pillar block located on the flat surface of the wainscoting on the opposite wall. Knowing that a vibrating system can eventually destroy itself, Dunn says that if there is no means to draw off or dampen the energy, there would have to be some kind of way to control the level of energy at which the system operates. As the output of the resonant cavity would only draw off the energy up to a certain level, that being the maximum amount the granite complex could process. There would have to be some means of controlling the energy as it built up inside the Grand Gallery. Dunn says that normally there would be 3 ways to prevent a vibrating system from running out of control. Number 1, shut off the source of vibrations. Can't do that. Number 2, reverse the process that was used to couple the vibration of the pyramid with the earth. Or 3, contrive a means to keep the vibration at a safe level. Dunn says, with the source of vibration being the earth, obviously numbers 2 and 3 are our best options. There are 2 ways to eliminate constant vibration. One is to dampen it, and the other is to counteract the vibration with an interference wave that cancels it out. Physically dampening the vibration would be impractical considering the function of the machine. The dampening wouldn't always be necessary, unlike the dampening needs of a bridge, and indeed would have an adverse effect on the efficiency of the machine. Consequently, it would involve moving parts like those in a piano. Faced with this consideration, I immediately started to look closer at the ascending passage. It is the only feature inside the Great Pyramid that contains devices. that are directly accessible from the outside. I call the granite plugs inside this passage devices in the same context I called the granite beams above the king's chamber devices, because it wasn't necessary to use granite to block this passage, and limestone would have been sufficient. It is obvious that their effectiveness at securing the inner chambers from robbers had the adverse effect. They drew attention to the existence of the ascending passage and subsequently the entire internal arrangement of passages and chambers. The granite plugs had to have another reason for being there. Possibly they were built into the structure to allow or facilitate interference sound waves being introduced into the grand gallery and prevent the buildup of vibration from within reaching destructive levels. It may have been the reason that the builders selected granite instead of limestone to plug the ascending passage. Concludes Dunn, the three plugs and their spacing within the passage may have, in fact, provided feedback to signal when the energy was reaching a dangerous level. By directing in or out of phase sound waves up the ascending passage, they may have been able to control the energy level of the system by directing a signal of the correct frequency. They may have also been able to prime the system in this manner also. In other words, the entire system would be forced to vibrate, and once in motion, it would draw energy from the earth with no further input. Sir William Flinders Petrie examined these blocks and described them in pyramids and temples of Giza. He remarked that the adjoining faces of the block were not flat, but had a wavy finish plus or minus 3 inches. I was unable to confirm this when I was in Egypt because the blocks exposed by Al-Munim's tunnel had slipped since Petrie's day and are now resting against each other. However, it does make for interesting speculation. Were the faces of the blocks cut specifically to modify sound waves? Could the ascending passage serve to direct an interference out-of-phase sound wave into the grand gallery, thereby controlling the level of energy in the system? There are mysteries still yet to be answered, but we are not finished yet. All right, that's the end of that chapter. Let's move on to the next chapter, The Great Crystal of Edgar Cayce. In a similar manner to Dunn's theories on the Great Pyramid is the psychic information from Edgar Cayce and the Association for Research and Enlightenment in Virginia Beach, Virginia. Known as the Sleeping Clairvoyant, Edgar Cayce was born on March 18, 1877, on a farm near Hopkinsville, Kentucky. Even as a child, he displayed powers of perception which seemed to extend beyond the normal range. In 1898, at the age of 21, he became a salesman for a wholesale stationery company that developed a gradual paralysis of the throat muscles, which threatened the loss of his voice. When doctors were unable to find the cause for the strange paralysis, he began to see a hypnotist. During a trance, the first of many for Cayce, he recommended medication and manipulative therapy, which successfully restored his voice and cured his throat trouble. He began doing readings for people, mostly a medical nature, and on October 9th, 1910, the New York Times carried 2 pages of headlines and pictures on the Cayce phenomenon. By the time Edgar Cayce died on January 3rd, 1945 in Virginia Beach, Virginia, he left well over 14,000 documented stenographic records of the telepathic clairvoyant statements he had given for more than 8,000 different people over a period of 43 years. These typewritten documents are referred to as readings. Important to our discussion in this book is that many of these readings concern Atlantis, persons' former lives in Atlantis, and the airships and motive power used in Atlantis. In reading 2437, January 1st, January 23rd, 1941, Cayce told his subject, quote, "In Atlantean land during those periods of greater expansion as to ways, means, and manners of applying greater conveniences for the people of the land, things of transportation, the aeroplane as called today, but then as ships of the air, for they sailed not only in the air, but in other elements also. A number of persons who came to Cayce for individual life readings were, according to Cayce's readings, once navigators or engineers on these aircraft. In the Atlantean land, when there were the developments of those things as made for motivative forces as carried the peoples into the various portions of the land and to other lands. Atlantean land, when peoples understood the law of universal forces, entity able to carry messages through space to other lands, guided crafts of that period. These are descriptions of people he gave readings to. Casey called the motive power used in these vessels the night side of life. In Atlantia, or Poseidia, entity ruled in pomp and power and in understanding of the mysteries of the application of that oft-termed the night side of life, or in applying the universal forces as understood in that period. In Atlantean period of those peoples that gained much in understanding of mechanical laws and application of night side of life for destruction. Casey speaks of the use of crystals or firestones for energy and related applications. He also speaks of the misuse of power and warnings of destruction to come. In Atlantean land, during the periods of Exodus due to foretelling and foreordination of activities which were bringing about destructive forces, among those who were not only in Yucatan but in the Pyrenees and Egyptian land, for the manners of transportation and communications through airships of that period were such as Ezekiel described at a much later date. In Atlantis, when there were activities that brought about the second upheaval in the land, entity was what would be in the present the electrical engineer, applied those forces or influences for airplanes, ships, and what you would call today radio for constructive or destructive purposes. Oh, like radio waves, frequencies. In Atlantean land, before the second destruction, when there was the dividing of islands, when the temptations were begun in activities of sons of Belial and the children of Law of One, entity among those that interpreted the message received through the crystals and the fires that were to be the eternal fires of nature. New developments in air and water travel are no surprise to this entity, as these were beginning development at the period of escape. In Atlantean land, at the time of development of electrical forces that dealt with transportation of craft from place to place, photographing at a distance, overcoming gravity itself, preparation of the crystal, the terrible mighty crystal, much of this brought destruction. All this stuff sounds really just disjointed. It really doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I mean, I get it. Each one of these is supposedly a description of somebody he did a reading for and is supposedly describing their characteristics in ancient Atlantis. It just seems very strange to me. I don't know. I always been kind of on the fence about Casey stuff. You know what I mean? I've never been, I don't know. I always kind of take everything he says with a grain of salt. But it just like anything, Sitchin or anything else, I mean, you definitely gain more from checking into the works of somebody like Casey than you do from just flat ignoring it, because you never know when something is going to jive with something you know to be absolutely true, you know. And maybe it's something in many cases that was not even known to anybody during the time of Edgar Casey. So, I mean, it's always one of those things to me that I take with a grain of salt, but don't ignore. In city of Paos in Atlantis, among people who gained understanding of application of night side of life, or negative influences in the earth's spheres, of those who gave much understanding to the manner of sound, voice, and picture, and such to peoples of that period. In Poseidia, the entity dwelt among those that had charge of the storage of the motivative forces from the great crystals that so condensed the lights, the forms of the activities, as to guide the ships in the sea and in the air and in the conveniences of the body as television and recording voice. The use of crystals as an important part of the technology is mentioned in a very long reading from December 29th, 1933. About the Firestone, the entity's activities then made such appliances and applications as dealt both with the constructive as well as deconstructive forces in that period. it would be well that there be given something of a description of this so that it may be understood better by the entity in the present. In the center of a building, which would today be said to be lined with non-conductive stone, something akin to asbestos, with other non-conductors such as are now being manufactured in England under a name which is well known to many who deal in such things. The building above the stone was oval, or a dome wherein there could be a portion for rolling back, so that the activity of the stars, the concentration of energies that emanate from bodies that are on fire themselves, along with elements that are found and not found in the Earth's atmosphere. The concentration through the prisms of glass, as it would be called at the present, was such manner that it acted upon the instruments which were connected with the various modes of travel through induction methods, which made the same character of control as would in the present day be termed remote control through radio vibrations or directions. Through the kind of force impelled from the stone acted upon the motivation forces in the crafts themselves. The building was constructed so that when the dome was rolled back, there might be little or no hindrance in the direct application of power to various crafts that were to be impelled through space, whether within the radius of vision or whether directed underwater or under elements or through other elements. Wow! So that's talking about a building actually being designed to produce electricity that ships and craft and everything, whether they be underwater or whether they be in the sky, could be powered from. I mean, is that what Casey was trying to tell us here? Is that he had knowledge or somehow channeled or pulled out of the ether or whatever else of these pyramids being... I mean, because that would make the most sense to me. Because it's talked about the Earth as being a way station, just makes so much sense to me, and that's been there for thousands of years. You know, there's all kinds of reports of various. I mean, it just seems that this planet has had a lot of people marooned on it because it's like some intergalactic subway system. That's another thing they say, that there are portals deep within the Earth, under the ocean, that allow you to traverse the galaxies in a great distance by going through them, and thus that's why we've had so many, UFO sightings and crash UFO sightings, because, they continue to visit. And they also say that's why we've never been invaded and blown away, is because the portals within the Earth are too valuable to have us destroyed. Some people believe that this is why the Van Allen radiation belt exists. The preparation of this stone was solely in the hands of the initiates at the time, and the entity was among those who directed the influence of radiation, which arose in the form of rays that were invisible to the eye, but acted upon the stones themselves as set in the motivating forces. Whether the aircraft were lifted by the gases of the period, or whether for guiding the more of pleasure vehicles that might pass along close to the Earth, or crafts on the water or under the water. These then were impelled by the concentration of rays from the stone, which was centered in the middle of the power station, or powerhouse, as would be the term in the present day. And the active forces of these, the entity brought destructive forces by setting up in various portions of the land the kind that was to act in producing powers for the various forms of the people's activities in the same cities, the towns, and the countries surrounding them. These, not intentionally, were tuned too high and brought the second period of destructive forces to the people of the land, and broke up the land into those isles, which later became the scene of further destructive forces in the land. Wow. So this is talking about things like, these maybe obelisks and maybe possibly other big stone monolithic structures which respond to frequencies being tuned too high, thus causing actual bodies of land to break apart and split up. And I found through my research for years and years and years that the idea of Pangea and the idea that all the world's land masses were one big gigantic landmass was a reality not as far back in history as they tell us. That's why they found Egyptian artifacts in places in South America, and in other places. I mean, it appears that's why these Amorites were able to, when they say in the ancient text the Amorites fled to the west to their copper mines in what we now know as Michigan, the way they were able to do that and traverse that so much, I believe, was because in those times, we're talking maybe 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 years ago, maybe even older than that, but at least 5,000 to 10,000 years ago, I would say, it's a possibility that we had a worldwide landmass. What they're saying here is that during the time of Atlantis, there was definitely that landmass, and the out-of-control technology into the hands of people who weren't very qualified to use it in some cases caused great frequency vibrations and caused land masses to break apart. I'd buy that. Absolutely. I think there's absolutely evidence to support that in these ancient monolithic structures. Through the same form of fire, the bodies of individuals were regenerated. By burning through application of rays from the stone, the influences that brought destructive forces to an animal organism. Hence, the body often rejuvenated itself and remained in that land until the eventual destruction. Well, that's like a machine that vibrates frequencies and causes the body to heal and regenerate. So these guys figured out how to keep their bodies from dying, their physical bodies from dying on by using frequencies. Boy, that's something we need to look into, huh? Joining with the peoples who made the breaking up of the land, or joining with the Belial at the final destruction of the land, in this, the entity lost. At first, it was not the intention nor desire for destructive forces. Later, it was for ascension of power itself. As for a description of the manner of construction of the stone, we find it was a large cylindrical glass, cut with facets in such manner that the capstone on top made for centralizing the power or force that concentrated between the end of the cylinder and the capstone itself. He's talking about an obelisk. It's absolutely what he's talking about. As indicated, the records as to ways of constructing the same are in 3 places in the earth. As it stands today, in the sunken portion of Atlantis or Poseidia, where a portion of the temples may yet be discovered under the slime of ages of seawater near what is known as Bimini off the coast of Florida. And secondly, in the temple records that were in Egypt, where the entity acted later in cooperation with others towards preserving the records that came from the land where these had been kept. Also in records that were carried to what is now Yucatan in America, where these stones, which they know so little about, are now, during the last few months, being uncovered. So he definitely makes a connection right there between ancient monolithic structures in the Americas to the Atlanteans and to the frequencies and all of that. Fascinating stuff, and definitely ties right in with what I've been looking at. Man, oh man, oh man. Exciting stuff. So we'll leave it right there, and we'll get into the next chapter tomorrow night, a giant pyramid underwater at Bimini. All right, a giant pyramid underwater at Bimini from David Hatcher Childress' Technology of the Gods. Bimini Island is a small member of the Bahamas, located about 50 miles east of Miami. Besides having sandy beaches, coral reefs, a variety of sunken ships, and some excellent fishing areas, Bimini is also the site of a series of very unusual underwater stone formations. This assemblage of huge blocks, many existing in straight patterns, are submerged only 20 or 30 feet of water. There may also be a large pyramid in the vicinity of Bimini as well underwater. The Bimini Wall was first discovered in 1968 by Dr. J. Manson Valentine. Florida's maverick archaeologist, Valentine first saw the wall from the surface of the water when the sea was especially clear. He was with 3 other divers at the time, Jacques Mayall, Harold Climo, and Robert Angove. Said Valentine in an interview, an extensive pavement of rectangular and polygonal flat stones of varying size and thickness, obviously shaped and accurately aligned to form a convincingly artifactual arrangement. These stones had evidently lain submerged over a long span of time, for the edges of the biggest ones had become rounded off, giving the blocks the domed appearance of giant loaves of bread or pillows. Some were absolutely rectangular, sometimes approaching perfect squares. One remembers that absolutely straight lines are never present in natural formations. And that I would I'd reference that to this Baltic Sea thing as well. There's straight lines in that. And the rock wall, there's an actual right angle. Those don't appear naturally. Straight lines and very, things that are done, Mason-like are not found naturally, folks, ever. The larger pieces, at least 10 to 15 feet in length, often ran the width of parallel-sided avenues, while the small ones formed mosaic-like pavements covering broader sections. The avenues of apparently fitted stones are straight-sided and parallel. The long one is a clear-cut double series, interrupted by two expanses containing very large flat stones propped up at the corners by vertical members, like the ancient dolmens of Europe. And the southeast end of this great roadway terminates in a beautifully curved corner. The three short causeways of accurately aligned large stones are of uniform width and end in corner stones. Dr. David Zink of the U.S. Air Force Academy in Colorado began doing research around Bimini that continues to this day. His book, The Stones of Atlantis, chronicles his many adventures with many good photographs in the waters around Bimini. Dr. Zink firmly believes that the Bimini Road is a man-made structure, but he has debunked a few of the other structures in the area, including a rectangular structure off Andros Island that was once believed to have been a temple site, but is now believed to be a sponge pen built in the 1930s. In 1974, he even photographed an unusual stone column standing upright that was believed to be the point of an obelisk that stood 40 to 50 feet tall, though most of it was buried in the ocean floor mud. Many believers in Atlantis have been very excited by these finds just opposite Miami, as Edgar Cayce had predicted that the first portion of the lost continent to be discovered would be located in this general area. Cayce, who died in 1945, had predicted that the first portion of Atlantis to rise would be found again in 1968 or 1969. Aerial reconnaissance of this region in 1968 and subsequent dives did indeed reveal these stone structures breaking the surface of the ocean floor. Another possibility is that these massive blocks are more likely the product of an early indigenous Indian civilization. Such a development could have served as the mother culture of the Olmecs and Maya in nearby Mesoamerica, as well as influenced the high centers of South America. At present, however, the weight of evidence is that these rocks may just be unique natural formations. Geologists and archaeologists have not found enough evidence to convince them to change their point of view. They contend that the area is simply composed of rather unusual types of fractured beach rock. Countless books have been written on the Bermuda Triangle, sometimes called the Devil's Triangle, of which Bimini is a part. Most books claim that some sort of vortex or time warp is responsible for missing ships, vanished airplanes, instruments that go haywire, and weird magnetic and atmospheric phenomena. There is good evidence that an energy vortex or gravitational anomaly, as they are sometimes called, is operating in the heavily trafficked waters off of Florida. In this area between Miami, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico, literally hundreds of ships and planes has vanished. In a few odd cases, ships have been found derelict without crews. Very little wreckage has been found. In 1990, it was announced that the 5 Navy torpedo bombers that had vanished in the Bermuda Triangle on December 1945 had been discovered off the waters of Fort Lauderdale. Later, it was announced that these were not the missing planes, but a different set of crashed airplanes with 2 of the craft having the same identification number. According to Charles Berlitz, the grandson of the founder of the Berlitz Language Schools and the author of the worldwide bestseller, The Bermuda Triangle, there are quite a few strange instances that have been recorded concerning the bizarre and life-threatening effects that occur in the Bermuda Triangle. According to Berlitz, an oceanic investigation party on the yacht New Freedom in July 1975 passed through an intense but rainless electromagnetic storm. During one tremendous burst of energy, Dr. Jim Thorpe photographed the exploding sky. The photograph, when developed, showed the burst in the sky, but it showed, too, a square-rigged ship on the sea about 100 feet away from the New Freedom, although a moment before, the sea had been empty. John Sander, a steward on the Queen Elizabeth, saw a small plane silently flying alongside his ship at deck level. He alerted another steward and the officer of the watch while the plane silently splashed into the ocean only 75 yards from the ship. The Queen Elizabeth I turned around and sent a boat over, but no indication of anything was found. Another phantom plane silently crashed into the ocean at Daytona Beach on February 17, 1935, in front of hundreds of witnesses. But an immediate search revealed nothing at all in the shallow water by the beach. A Cessna 172 piloted by Helen Casico took off for Turks Island, Bahamas with a single passenger about the time she should have arrived. A Cessna 172 was seen by the tower circling the island but not landing. Voices from the plane could be heard by the tower, but landing instructions from the tower evidently could not be heard by the pilot. A woman's voice was heard saying, "I must have made a wrong turn. That should be Turks, but there's nothing down there. No airport, no houses." It's some kind of time warp thing, yeah. In the meantime, the tower attempted to give landing to the unresponsive Cessna. Finally, the woman's voice said, "Is there no way out of this?" And the Cessna, watched by hundreds of people, flew away from Turks into a cloud bank from which it apparently never exited. Since the plane, the pilot, and the passenger were never found. As Berlitz points out, the plane had been visible to the people on Turks, but when the pilot looked down, apparently she saw only an undeveloped island. Had she been seeing the island at a point in time before the airport and the houses had been built? Where did this plane finally land? Did it land on the beach of some past or future world? Various theories have been put forth to explain the Bermuda Triangle mystery. Sudden giant waves or eruptions of underwater volcanoes, whirlpools, and holes in the ocean have all been used as possible causes. Most researchers are willing to admit, though, that some sort of electromagnetic disturbance that causes instruments to malfunction is operating in the area. There are local stories of strange, dense, compact fogs on the surface of the water or in the sky. According to local belief, ships or aircraft that enter these odd clouds do not emerge. Berlitz gives us the theory of Tom Gary, author of Adventures of an Amateur Psychic, who claims that the Bermuda Triangle's destructive force comes from energy emanating from beneath the sea. There is speculation that a power structure is still underwater in the Bermuda area. Wrote Gary, according to him, the structure sits atop a large core that extends down through the crust of the earth. When conditions are right, the power structure works intermittently, causing ship and plane captains to lose control of their aircraft. According to Gary, streaming ions form an electric current that produces a magnetic field that causes instrument failure in craft in the vicinity. Magnetic compasses, fuel gauges, altitude indicators, and all electrically operated instruments are affected. Pilots who have survived such activity have reported battery drainage as well. An incredible story is told by Ray Brown of Mesa, Arizona, that concerns an ancient pyramid off the Berry Islands in the Bahamas. In 1970, Brown claims to have been in a big storm while on the Berry Islands, having been looking for sunken galleons. In the morning after the storm, he says, their compasses were spinning and their magnometers were not giving any readings. We took off northeast from the island. It was murky, but suddenly we could see outlines of buildings under the water. It seemed to be a large, exposed area of an underwater city. We were 5 divers, and we all jumped in and dove down looking for anything we could find. As we swam on, the water became clearer. I was close to the bottom at 135 feet and was trying to keep up with a diver ahead of me. I turned to look toward the sun through the murky water and saw a pyramid shape shining like a mirror About 35 to 40 feet from the top was an opening. I was reluctant to go inside, but I swam inside anyway. The opening was like a shaft debouching into an inner room. I saw something shining. It was a crystal held by two metallic hands. This sounds like something straight out of Atlantis. I had it on my gloves and tried to loosen it. It became loose. And as soon as I grabbed it, I felt that this was time to get out and not come back. I'm not the only person who has seen these ruins. Others have seen them from the air and say they are 5 miles wide and more than that in length. Burles reports that 3 of the other divers have since died in accidents in the Bermuda Triangle, and that Brown occasionally shows the crystal that he allegedly took from the sunken pyramid to lecture audiences. Berlitz has seen the crystal himself, though it is not necessarily from a pyramid in the Caribbean. Brown will not reveal the exact site of the city, but he believes that the pyramid and other buildings extend far below the ocean floor. He was only lucky that the storm the day before had cleared the ruins of sand and silt. While this story seems almost too fantastic to be true, there is the distinct possibility that it is somehow based on fact. The fact that there may be a giant pyramid somewhere near Florida that is causing powerful electromagnetic effect. And supposedly there's a picture of it out there I've seen. It's a big glass, green, glowing pyramid, underwater picture they found off the coast of Florida. This giant pyramid might be another of the giant generating stations that once existed around the world, similar to Christopher Dunn's theories on the Great Pyramid. That's the end of that chapter. Just got a bunch of pictures to scroll through here, blah, blah, blah. And, that's the end of chapter 7. So the end of chapter 7. Chapter 8 is the cyclical nature of history. We're starting chapter 8 tonight, the cyclical nature of history. History is cyclical in nature, the evidence shows us. What is today was before, what was yesterday will be tomorrow. We need to learn from our mistakes, so instead of traveling endlessly in a repetitive cycle, we move in an upward spiral toward perfection and utopia. We are today as the gods of yesterday. We fly through the air, we communicate with magic mirrors and talking boxes. We have tremendous war machines and move things in a way that seems like magic. The cyclical nature of history brings us around to ages of great technology as well as to dark ages of ignorance and scientific repression. To get humankind through the dark ages, secret societies and secret libraries have been created to protect important knowledge, such as the fact that the world is a sphere, that electricity can be used for lighting, etc. Things that are a part of everyday life today were yesterday's secrets. How many people have been tortured and killed in the effort to prevent technological and scientific advancement? The list would be a long one. The Book of Enoch. The Bible is important, not only in a religious context, but as a historical document. The Bible gives us tales, in many cases derived from ancient Samaria and Egypt, that would otherwise be lost to us because of the destruction of knowledge throughout history. 14 ancient texts considered for inclusion in the Bible were ultimately left out of most versions. These books are collectively called the Apocrypha. The apocryphal book of Enoch the prophet was first discovered in Abyssinia in the year 1773 by a Scottish explorer named James Bruce. And, of course, Bruce from Scotland is a Merovingian blue blood family. That's Phyllis Schlafly, who's in the CMP, comes from the Bruce Scottish bloodline. So it's interesting because this guy was pretty much considered to be the prototype. I've read quite a bit about this guy, James Bruce, before. And it's interesting because he's actually related to Phyllis Schlafly. And he was like the prototype of Indiana Jones. They've laid that claim to a lot of people. The guy who discovered the Mitchell Hedges skull, they've called him the basis for Indiana Jones. Not true. Scottish explorer James Bruce was the actual real Indiana Jones. In fact, supposedly that entire story surrounding like the Ark of the Covenant and stuff actually did happen to Bruce. Bruce, a sort of 18th century Indiana Jones, may have seen the Ark of the Covenant at Axum and was able to obtain the ancient Coptic Christian text approximately 2,000 years old. In 1821, the Book of Enoch was translated by Richard Lawrence and published in a number of successive editions, culminating in the 1883 edition. Moreover, Azazel taught... Wait a minute, did it skip something? Oh, says the Book of Enoch in chapter 8, quote, "Moreover, Azazel taught men to make swords, knives, shields, breastplates, the fabrications of mirrors, and the workmanship of bracelets and ornaments, the use of paint, the beautifying of the eyebrow, the use of stones of every valuable and select kind, and of all sorts of dyes, so that the world became altered." Here we have yet another example of technology being handed over to mankind in ancient times by a helping god or Superman, reminiscent of the stories of Osiris, Quetzalcoatl, and Tubal-Cain. Interesting thing is those are all the same people. Osiris, Quetzalcoatl, Tubal-Cain, it's all the same people. The Masons know that full well because they know about the transmigration of souls, essentially, is what it is. Transcending the death of the physical body by transferring your Ka life force into another vessel. And you have to learn the Merkaba technique, the Merkaba meditation technique, in order to be able to do that. It's all in the Emerald Tablets of Thoth as well. This was world-altering technology, and it is interesting to note that the first items mentioned have to do with waging war. Who was Azazel, and where did he get the knowledge that he imparted? The Cave of the Ancients. The curious and rather prolific British author T. Lobsang Rampa wrote a popular book on the theme of the cyclical nature of history in 1963 called The Cave of the Ancients. In the book, reportedly nonfiction, the young Rampa, a boy monk in Tibet, is taken to a remote spot by his teacher guru to see the amazing Cave of the Ancients, a repository of ancient machines and devices. After they entered the remote hidden cave, says Rampa, the four of us stood silent and frightened, gazing at the fantastic sight before us. A sight which would have made any one of us alone think that we had taken leave of his senses. The cave was more like an immense hall. It stretched away in the distance as if the mountain itself was hollow. The light was everywhere, beating down upon us. A number of globes which appeared to be suspended from the darkness of the roof. Strange machines crammed the place, machines such as we could not have imagined. Even from the high roof hung suspended apparatus and mechanisms. Some I saw with great amazement were covered by what would appear to be the clearest of glass. Slowly and almost imperceptibly, a misty glow formed in the darkness before us. At first, it was just a suspicion of blue-pink light, almost as if a ghost were materializing before our gaze. The mist light spread, becoming brighter so that we could see the outlines of incredible machines filling this large hall, all except the center of the floor upon which we sat. The light drew in upon itself, swirling, fading, and becoming brighter, and then it formed and remained in spherical shape. I had the strange and unexplainable impression of age-old machinery creaking slowly into motion after eons of time. The Lama Mingyar Dondup tells young Rampa, quote, "Thousands and thousands of years ago, there was a high civilization upon this world. Men could fly through the air in machines which defied gravity. Men were able to make machines which would impress thoughts upon the minds of others, thoughts that would appear as pictures. They had nuclear fission, and at last they detonated a bomb which all but wrecked the world, causing continents to sink below the oceans and others to rise. The world was decimated, and so throughout the religions of this earth, we now have the story of the flood." The Lama continues, quote, "There is a similar chamber at a certain place in the country of Egypt. There is another chamber with identical machines located in a place called South America. I have seen them. I know where they are. These secret chambers were concealed by the peoples of old so that their artifacts would be found by a later generation when the time was ready. The group moves through the galleries inside the mountain. We moved to the panel which the Lama Mingyar Dondup had told me about previously. And at our approach, it opened with a grating creak so loud in the silence of the place that I think we all jumped up with alarm. Inside was the darkness, profound, almost as if we had clouds of blackness swirling around us. Our feet were guided by shallow channels in the floor. We shuffled along, and when the channels ended, we sat down. As we did so, there came a series of clicks, like metal scraping against metal, and almost imperceptibly light stole across the darkness and pushed it aside. We looked about us and saw more machines, strange machines. There were statues here, and pictures carved in metal. Before we had a time to more than glance, the light drew in upon itself and formed a glowing globe in the center of the hall. Colors flickered aimlessly, and bands of light without apparent meaning swirled around the globe. Pictures formed, at first blurred and indistinct, then growing vivid and real with three-dimensional effect. We watched intently. This was the world of long, long ago, when the world was very young. Mountains stood where now there are seas, and the pleasant seaside resorts are now mountaintops. The weather was warmer, and strange creatures roamed afield. This was a world of scientific progress. Strange machines rolled along, flew inches from the surface of the earth, or flew miles up in the air. Great temples reared their pinnacles skywards, as if in challenge to the clouds. Animals and man talked telepathically together. But all was not bliss. Politicians fought against politicians. The world was a divided camp in which each side coveted the lands of the other. Suspicions and fear were the clouds under which the ordinary man lived. Priests of both sides proclaimed that they alone were the favored of the gods. In the pictures before us, we saw ranting priests, as now, purveying their own brand of salvation at a price. Priests of each sect taught that it was a holy duty to kill the enemy. Almost in the same breath, they would preach that mankind throughout the world were brothers. The illogicality of brother killing brother did not occur to them. We saw great wars fought, with most of the casualties being civilians. The armed forces behind their armor were mostly safe. The aged, the women and children, those who did not fight, were the ones to suffer. We saw glimpses of scientists working in laboratories, working to produce even deadlier weapons, working to produce bigger and better bugs to drop on the enemy. One sequence of pictures showed a group of thoughtful men planning what they had termed a time capsule, what we call the Cave of the Ancients. wherein they could store for later generations working models of their machines and a complete pictorial record of their culture and lack of it. Immense machines excavated the living rock. Hordes of men installed the models in the machines. We saw the cold light spheres hoisted in place, inert radioactive substances giving off light for millions of years, inert in that it could not harm humans, active in that the light would continue almost until the end of time itself. A hollow mountain as an atomic refuge. Fantastic as Lobsang Rampa's tale may seem, it is billed as nonfiction. And there are other sources which support the idea of secret repositories of knowledge, also the existence of caves full of high-tech equipment. Today we do not make giant pyramids like the Great Pyramid of Egypt. Instead, we make giant underground military bases such as Area 51 in Nevada. We even hollow out entire mountains. The NORAD Defense Command at Cheyenne Mountain in Colorado Springs is a hollow mountain with an entire city inside. The normal citizen walking inside Cheyenne Mountain would be absolutely astonished at the level of technology within the facility. These high-tech bases are housed underground to protect them in the event of catastrophe, including nuclear war. Doesn't this sound similar to the Cave of the Ancients? Other hollow monuments were said to have existed in ancient times as well. Mount Shasta in Northern California is one such mountain. Mount Shasta is sometimes said to have a Lemurian city inside of it. Strange lights are said to be seen from time to time on the mountain, and UFOs are reported to appear there. The great Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu often talked about the ancient ones in his writings, much as Confucius did. They were wise and knowledgeable, human beings that were as gods, powerful, good-loving, and all-knowing. These ancients apparently lived in a secret remote area of China or Tibet, guarding the wisdom of the ages. Born around 604 BC, Lao Tzu wrote the book, which is still perhaps the most famous Chinese classic of all time, the Tao Te Ching. When he finally left China, at the close of his very long life, he journeyed to the west to the legendary land of Hisi Wang Mu to seek the headquarters of the Ancient Ones, the Great White Brotherhood. It was as he was leaving at one of the border posts of western China that a guard persuaded him to write down the Tao Te Ching so that Lao Tzu's wisdom would not be lost. The ancient masters were subtle, mysterious, profound, responsive. The depth of their knowledge is unfathomable. Because it is unfathomable, all we can do is describe their appearance. Watchful, like men crossing a winter stream. Alert, like men aware of danger. Courteous, like visiting guests. Yielding, like ice about to melt. Simple, like uncarved blocks of wood. No one ever heard of Lao Tzu again, and it is presumed that he made it to the land of Hai Wang Mu. Hai Wang Mu is another name for the popular Chinese goddess Kuan Yin, the merciful guardian and queen mother of the West. Her land, traditionally located in the Kunlun Mountains, was known as the abode of the immortals, the Western Paradise. In Myths and Legends of China, a collection published, I just think that's interesting. I didn't know that. The Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu, so he ascended. He went to the became immortal. Nobody ever saw or heard from him again. Hell yeah. In Myths and Legends of China, a collection published in 1922, Hisi Wang Mu is connected to a lost continent. Hisi Wang Mu was formed of the pure quintessence of the western air in the legendary continent of Shen Chao. As Mu Kang, formed of the eastern air, is the active principle of the male air and sovereign of the eastern air. So Hisi Wang Mu, born of the western air, is the passive or female principle, yin, and the sovereign of the western air. These two principles cooperating engender heaven and earth and all the beings of the universe, and thus become the two principles of life and of the substance of all that exists. She is the head of the troop of Genie dwelling on the Kunlun Mountains, the Taoist equivalent of the Buddhist Sumeru, and from the time to time holds intercourse with favored imperial votaries. Hsi Wangmu's palace is situated in the high mountains of the snowy Kunlun. It is about 333 miles in circuit. A rampart of massive gold surrounds its embattlements of precious stones. Its right wing rises on the edge of the Kingfisher's River. It is the usual abode of the immortals, who are divided into 7 special categories according to the color of their garments: red, blue, black, violet, yellow, green, and nature color. There is a marvelous fountain built of precious stones where the periodical banquet of the immortals is held. This feast is called Pan Tao Hui, the Feast of the Peaches. It takes place on the borders of Yao Chie, the Lake of Gems, and is attended by both male and female immortals. Over the years of Chinese history, many expeditions were sent out to the Kunlun Mountains, the Mount of Olympus of ancient China, in an attempt to contact the Ancient Ones. In the Qin dynasty, the Emperor Wu Ti ordered the scholar Hsiu to re-edit the bamboo books found in the tomb of an ancient king named Ling Wang, the son of Haiqing Wang, ruler of the Wei state, circa 245 BC. The books recorded the travels of the Chao dynasty Emperor Mu, who journeyed to the Kunlun Mountains to pay a visit to the royal mother of the West. The emperor met with Hsi Wangmu on an auspicious day. The ancient Chinese counted days and years in a special cyclical fashion similar to the ancient Mayans of Central America. Isn't that interesting? There are 10 characters known as the 10 stems of heaven and another 12 characters known as the 12 branches of earth. The combination of these two sets of characters give names to the 60 years of the Chinese cycle. They named and counted days in the same way. Emperor Mu had an audience with Hsi Wangmu on the bank of Jasper Lake in the Kunlun Range. She blessed him and sang for him, and the emperor promised to return in 3 years after bringing peace and prosperity to his millions of subjects. He then had rocks engraved as a record of his visit and departed eastward across the desert back to his kingdom. Not all were so lucky as to meet the goddess, however. While traveling just north of the Kunlun Mountains in Xinjiang, the famous Russian artist, explorer, and mystic Nicholas Roerich first heard of the Valley of the Immortals located just over the mountains. Behind that mountain live holy men who are saving humanity through wisdom. Many tried to see them but failed. Somehow, as soon as they go over the ridge, they lose their way. A native guide told him of huge vaults inside the mountains where treasures had been stored from the beginning of history. He also indicated that tall white people had been disappearing into those rock galleries. Nicholas Rourke was at one time in possession of a fragment of a magical stone from another world called in Sanskrit the Chittamani stone. Alleged to have come from the star system of Sirius, ancient Asian chronicles claim that a divine messenger from the heavens gave a fragment of the stone to Emperor Taozavu of Atlantis. According to legend, the stone was later sent to King Solomon in Jerusalem, who you will remember was said to have traveled all over Asia and Africa in a Vimana airship. He split the stone and made a ring out of one piece. The stone is believed by some people to be a Moldavite. Oh yeah, Moldavite's a badass. Moldavite's a badass crystal, man. Yeah, it's hard to get too. A magnetic stone sold in crystal shops, said to have fallen to Earth in a meteor shower 14.8 million years ago. Moldavite is said to be a spiritual accelerator and has achieved a certain popularity in recent years. It is entirely possible that the Chittamani stone is a special piece of Moldavite. It is worth noting here, too, that the sacred black stone kept in the Kaaba of Mecca to which all Muslims pray, is also a piece of meteorite. Nicholas Roerich himself saw what was possibly a Vimana on the land of Hisi Wangmu in the Kunlun. In his travel diary of August 5th, 1926, while in the Kukamor district, he noted that their caravan saw something big and shiny reflecting the sun, like a huge oval meeting at great speed. Crossing our camp, this thing changed in this direction from south to southwest, and we saw how it disappeared in the intense blue sky. We even had time to take our field glasses and saw quite distinctly an oval form with a shiny surface on one side, which was brilliant from the sun. The strong similarity between the legends of Shambhala and the secret land of Hisi Wangmu is easily noticed. Shambhala, reputedly relocated in Tibet, is famous as a repository of ancient wisdom, sheltered from the ages in a secluded valley. An ancient library was also said to be kept underground in Tibet. In some traditions, the library is said to be near Lhasa, possibly connected to the underground tunnels beneath the Potala, the Dalai Lama's famous skyscraper. The stories of hidden archives and centers of learning are too universal and widespread to be easily dismissed. Incredible as it may seem, there may be a repository of ancient Chinese knowledge in the Kunlun range of the northwestern area of Tibet. Perhaps a hollow mountain filled with the relics of ancient technology. It is my belief that advanced technology was developed over 12,000 years ago. You need to push it a little far back there, Childress. Sorry, bud. 12,000 didn't even begin to scratch the surface. This technology is way older than that. This technology was used in some civilizations around the world, though not all. Just as Stone Age tribes still live in the highlands of New Guinea and other places today, many people were still primitive in those days as well. We call these ancient high-tech civilizations Atlantis, Rama, Osiris, and other names. Atlantis, I believe, is beneath the mid-Atlantic in the vicinity of the Azores and the Bahamas. Although it was a small continent, its influence reached across the waters to the Americas and to what are now Britain, Ireland, and the Mediterranean Sea. The Atlantic Island civilization was a contemporary with other civilizations such as the Osirian civilization of the Mediterranean, Egypt, and North Africa, and the Rama Empire of India. In the Far East, perhaps in Indonesia and Southeast Asia, was another advanced civilization strongly connected to ancient India and the Rama Empire. Around 10,000 BC, geological upheavals, perhaps both natural and man-made, sank Atlantis and affected the whole world, especially Europe and the Americas. The Mediterranean was apparently flooded at this time, creating the various islands and unique megalithic structures around this inland sea. Much of this ancient technology was lost to humankind. 1,000 years after the destruction of Atlantis and upheavals in other empires, the Hittites and Egyptians began to explore the newly created Mediterranean Sea area and the Atlantic. In the Americas, early groups such as the Tiahuanaco culture and the Mayans began to recreate their civilizations. Seafarers of the legendary Atlantean League began to cross the Atlantic again by about 6,000 BC. These same Mediterraneans colonized areas of northern Europe, including the British Isles, as far north as the Shetlands. North Sea earthquakes finished off the coastal civilization that inhabited much of the Netherlands, Denmark, and Sweden. This civilization was much later than Atlantis, probably reaching its height around 1500 BC. At about this time, or shortly thereafter, the Sea Peoples, with their horned helmets, came from Denmark, England, Holland, Germany, and France to the Mediterranean to invade Greece, Egypt, and the Hittite Empire. Like today, powerful nations fought wars that spanned entire continents. Secret societies like the Knights Templar turned ancient Phoenician ports into their own strongholds. There's an old saying, what goes around comes around. Mankind's love for warfare has both fueled his technology and created much destruction and woe. Great teachers incarnate from time to time to try to teach man to love his neighbor and to live in a peaceful, helpful manner with others. Yet our history is one of non-stop warfare and invasion. Technology is, in many ways, driven by warfare. Man slaughters man, and the gods look down in pain and sorrow at what we have created for ourselves. Plato and the Egyptian priests have given us the story of one ancient civilization that waged war on the rest of the world with disastrous results. Today's looming wars have their roots in history. The creation of the Christian church, the creation of the Islamic Empire, the creation of the Jewish refugee state of Israel, the conflict of ancient foes over energy sources and land control. The current war being fought by the Russians in Chechnya is also one of religious conflict, combined with a desire to control oil wealth from the Caspian Sea. Now that technology has again reached a point of no return, perhaps we are ready to jump to the next level, a level beyond the technology of today, the technology of the gods of tomorrow, a technology that allows man to finally learn to live in harmony with nature and his fellow man. And that is the end of the book, ladies and gentlemen. I knew we were getting close, but I didn't expect we'd finish it tonight. But boom, there you go. All right. David Hatcher Childress' Technology of the Gods. All right, Chapter 7, The Earth as a Giant Power Plant. The structures of the Giza Plateau in Egypt are perhaps the most famous examples of technological wonders built by the ancients using technologies we can neither understand or duplicate today. Who built these monuments, how, and why has been the focus of immense speculation over the years. The Sphinx is one of the three most controversial structures in Egypt, along with the Great Pyramid and the Osirian at Abydos, carved out of solid rock. The Sphinx seems to typify the mystery of Egypt as it gazes silently out away from the pyramids. Well, it's aligned to Leo. It's aligned to... Come on, Childress, that's fucking kindergarten, dude. You ought to know that. It's not just staring blankly out into nowhere. It's had a very specific alignment with very specific astrological significance. He just, I don't know. Sometimes some of his stuff, it just seems kind of hackish to me. It's like, really? You may have, I mean, just because you've gone all over the world, all these ancient sites, it doesn't mean you know anything, you know? That can't give you common sense or the ability to research and read on your own. Anyway, the age of the Sphinx is a matter of great debate. The body is severely eroded, though the Egyptian government is now reconstructing it. What could have caused this heavy decay? The controversial German Egyptologist Schwaller de Lubicus observed that the dramatically severe erosion on the body could not be the result of wind and sand, as universally assumed, but was rather the result of water. Geologists agree that in the not-so-distant past, Egypt was subjected to severe flooding. This period is usually held to coincide with the melting of the ice from the last ice age, circa 15,000 to 10,000 BC. This would indicate that the Sphinx was already constructed by this time, but would make it easily the oldest structure in Egypt, built long before the recognized Egyptian civilization began. Suddenly, we are back to the tales of the ancient Osirian Empire, Atlantis, and the cataclysmic pole shifts that have rocked our planet every 10,000 years or so. The Sphinx is often said to be the likeness of the pharaoh Chephren, of whom several statues, one in the form of a sphinx, were found upside down in the temple next to the Sphinx. The Sphinx, in fact, is said to have been recarved at least once, and its head is unnaturally small for its body, indicating that it once had a much larger head. Perhaps the pharaoh Chephren had the Sphinx recarved to his likeness during his lifetime. Yeah, well, they had to get rid of that elongated alien skull head it had before. They knew that was they were not going to be able to keep people controlled if they had, the big elongated alien skull head there. That's that's why Akhenaten had his head shaped that way and the rest of it. The Valley Temple of Chephren next to the Sphinx is also an unusual structure. It is constructed of huge granite and limestone blocks weighing up to 100 tons apiece. No inscriptions of any kind were found in the temple, and the blocks are perfectly fitted together in a curious jigsaw pattern that interlocks the blocks. As has been noted previously, this is a trademark of the builders, a type of megalithic construction that is not only extremely difficult to make, but also difficult to tear down. Because the blocks are interlocked, they cannot shear like bricks or square blocks of masonry. It's especially interesting to compare the construction technique found at the Valley Temple of Chepron to that at Cuzco, Sacsayhuaman, Ollantaytambo, and even Machu Picchu. There are also said to be secret passages beneath the Giza Plateau. These passages go to the pyramids, allegedly starting from the Sphinx, and are part of the ancient mystery schools of Egypt. Yeah. Manly P. Hall talks about that. You have to go in there with your etherical temple garment on, and you battle this all-seeing eye thing that turns out to be an illusion, and then, you go into the mystery religions after that. The pyramid were never meant to be seen. One possibility is that the ingenious theory that the pyramid itself was a hydraulic pump and the blocks were floated into place on rafts from nearby Lake Moeris. Another theory that has a certain attraction to mystics is that the blocks were levitated using what the Egyptians called ma'at, a force of mind power akin to the Sanskrit mana power of the mind. Was the Great Pyramid poured into place? One curious theory of the pyramids is postulated by an authority on ancient construction techniques named Dr. Joseph Devotovitz. Devotovitz claims that he's been saying over the last several years that the Great Pyramid of Egypt, as well as the other pyramids in Egypt, was not constructed out of cut stone as has always been assumed. Devotovitz claims that the large blocks were actually poured into place, and that they are an advanced and ingenious form of synthetic stone that was cast on the spot like concrete. Davidovich reports on his research at the meeting of the American Chemical Society in the mid-1980s. He is founder and director of the Institute for Applied Archaeological Sciences located near Miami. He is also author of the 1988 book, The Pyramids, an Enigma Solved. Davidovich claims that a new deciphering of an ancient hieroglyphic text has provided some direct information about pyramid construction, and that it supports his theory that synthetic stone was the construction material. The text, called the Famine Stele, was discovered 100 years ago on an island near Elephantine. It consists of 2,600 hieroglyphics, about 650 of which have been interpreted as dealing with stone fabrication techniques. The text claims that an Egyptian god gave the instructions for making synthetic stone to Pharaoh Zoser, who is said to have built the first pyramid in 2750 BC. Included were a list of 29 minerals that could be processed with crushed limestone and other natural aggregates into a synthetic stone for use in the building of temples and pyramids. Like the chemists of the 17th and 18th centuries, the Egyptians named these minerals according to their physical properties. The materials were called onion ore, garlic ore, and horseradish ore because of their distinctive smells. Davidovich believes the minerals in the ores contained arsenic. Other ingredients for making synthetic stone, phosphates from bones or dung, Nile silt, limestone, and quartz were also readily available. According to the theory, the ingredients were mixed with water and placed into wooden forms similar to those used for concrete. Davidovich said the cement in the pyramid stone binds the aggregate and other ingredients together chemically in a process similar to that involved in the formation of natural stone. Thus, pyramid stone is extremely difficult to distinguish from natural stone. Portland cement, by contrast, involves mechanical rather than molecular bonding of its ingredients. Also, Egyptian cement would last for thousands of years, while ordinary cement has an average lifespan of only 150 years. Organic fibers having accidentally fallen into the mixture have been found in the stone blocks of the Great Pyramid, claims Davidovich. What was the function of the pyramids? Actually, though it is usually said that the pyramids were tombs for the pharaohs, the evidence is generally against this theory, startling as it may seem. No Egyptian mummy was ever found in a pyramid. Many Egyptian mummies have been found, but not inside pyramids. Rather, they've been found in underground vaults and tunnels, such as those in the Valley of the Kings where Tutankhamun was found. As the normally traditional archaeologist Kurt Mendelsohn says in his book, The Riddle of the Pyramids, while the funerary function of the pyramids cannot be doubted, a strange shaft in the Giza Plateau between the Pyramid of Chepron and the Sphinx is known as Campbell's Tomb or Campbell's Well. This shaft is now blocked by a grate but one can still look down it. The shaft is about 15 feet square on each side, about 100 feet deep. On each side of the walls, one can see numerous tunnels, passages, and doors cut into solid rock. These passageways are part of the tunnel system that goes beneath the Giza Plateau. It is purposely dangerous to attempt to reach the pyramids or the secret underground rooms that can be found in the tunnels. Their existence and what lies in them is a matter of legend and prophecy. It has been suggested that a secret library from Atlantis is hidden somewhere inside, underneath, or nearby the pyramids of Giza. This library is generally called the Ancient Hall of Records. According to some, the Ancient Hall of Records preserved ancient knowledge in the form of encoded quartz crystals, much like a hologram might be encoded by a laser today. Also in these secret chambers, sealed from the rest of mankind during the dark ages of Egyptian history when the evil priesthood sought to control mankind, are supposedly machines and devices from that forgotten age. There is a belief by some that the Ark of the Covenant was contained inside the Great Pyramid for some time and then taken by Moses when the Israelites split for the Promised Land. The pyramids of the Giza Plateau have been recognized as feats of engineering wonder since time immemorial. Herodotus of the Greeks claims that he was told by priests 2,000 years or more after the Great Pyramid's construction that teams of 10,000 men each labored for 10 years to build a ramp for the blocks. Then another 20 years to build the pyramid, and finally another 10 years to put the casing stones on the pyramid, starting from the top down. Yeah, that's total bullshit. They claim they were built in 20 years. There's no way. Herodotus claimed that Cheops financed the construction by having his own daughter work as a prostitute. And it's Daddy needs a pyramid, girl. Get up there and sell that ass. God damn. They just bang the shit out of this guy so he can get him a pyramid built. Fuck. An inscription read to Herodotus at the base of the pyramid by priests told the number of onions and radishes it took to feed the laborers, yet it appears that Herodotus was being told a story. No trace of a ramp has actually ever been discovered. Most scholars believe that the ramp Herodotus refers to is the causeway leading up from the Nile past the Sphinx. All the pyramids had this causeway leading up to them, but it apparently had nothing to do with their construction. There are no actual wall writings of a pyramid being constructed, but there are drawings that portray the transport of gigantic obelisks and giant statues weighing more than 100 tons by men pulling sleds. According to John Anthony West, even though it was possible to muster up enough labor to build the pyramids over time, some sort of lifting device would have had to have been employed, which so far no one has come up with. Yeah, well, they have the Coral Castle in Florida. The guy that built that used the same technology that built the pyramids. That's a fact. It's a sort of anti-grav device. Other engineers claim that no lifting device was needed and that the ramp merely had to reach the top of the pyramid. However, a Danish engineer named P. Garde Hansen has calculated that such a ramp would require 17.5 million cubic yards of material, 7 times more than used in the building of the pyramid itself. Garde Hansen believes that a ramp going halfway up the pyramid would be better, but it would still be necessary to use a lifting device, which brings us back to the old problem. The placing of the limestone casing stones, which weigh up to 10 tons or more, is an even bigger problem as they are cut and fitted with such precision. Cheops did not even sign his own pyramid. The only marks in the pyramid are quarry marks on granite blocks on the inside of the pyramid. These were only discovered with the tearing apart. It is rather more difficult to prove that the pharaohs were ever buried inside of them. Leaving out Zoser's step pyramid with its unique burial chambers, the 9 remaining pyramids contain no more than 3 authentic sarcophagi. These are distributed over no fewer than 14 tomb chambers. Petrie has shown that lidless sarcophagus in the Khufu Cheops pyramid had been put into the king's chamber before the latter was roofed over, since it is too large to pass through the entrance passage. One would like to know what has happened to the missing sarcophagi. The robbers might have smashed their lids, but they would hardly have taken the trouble to steal a smashed sarcophagus. In spite of careful search, no chips of broken sarcophagi have been found in any of the pyramid passages or chambers. Moreover, it has to be remembered that from the medium pyramid onward, The entrance was well above ground level. At the bent pyramid, even the lower corridor is located 12 meters above the base, and bringing a heavy sarcophagus in or out would have necessitated the use of a substantial ramp. The fact that sarcophagi in the Khufu and Khafre Chephren pyramids were found empty is easily explained as the work of intruders, but the empty sarcophagi of Sekhmet, Queen Hetepheres, and a third one in a shaft chamber under a step pyramid pose a different problem. They were all left undisturbed since early antiquity. As these were burials without a corpse, we are almost driven to the conclusion that something other than a human body may have been ritually entombed. We have already referred to the fact that Sneferu seems to have had 2 or even 3 large pyramids, and he can hardly have been buried in all of them. While very few people will dispute that the pyramids had some connection with the afterlife of the pharaoh, the general statement that the pharaohs were buried in them is by no means undisputable. Quite possibly each pyramid, one housed the body of Pharaoh, but there also exists an unpleasantly large number of factors that speak against it. It is on the basis of these complexities and contradictions that Egyptologists have had to try and find a solution to the most difficult problem of all. Why were these immense pyramids built in the first place? If the pyramids weren't tombs, what were they? There is the theory that they are astronomical observatories. Another idea is that the pyramids, especially the Great Pyramid, were geodetic markers and time capsules in the sense that higher knowledge, such as sophisticated geometry and mathematics, were incorporated into the structures. Others have claimed the pyramids were centers of inspiration. Then, of course, there is always pyramid energy. The word pyramid is, in fact, Greek for fire in the center. The next chapter is the Giza power plant. Now, interestingly enough, and hopefully this chapter, it's kind of a long chapter, but I want to get through it tonight. Hopefully this chapter will shed some light on something I've had questions about in my research for the new film concerning the rock wall. And in the footage from the John Lindsay 1999 rock wall dig, there's clips of that in the little trailer I've got up on the website for the Lost Secrets of Ancient America, Volume 1. And in that footage, the guy who wrote the book, The Giza Power Plant, was there checking out the scene. And I was wondering what correlations he believed the rock wall had to the idea of the Giza Power Plant. Now, I've seen my own correlations, but I haven't seen anything saying what he thought. So maybe this chapter will shed some light on that. The belief that the pyramids were a device for tapping the energy of the Van Allen radiation belts, where the bulk of the pyramid served as a protective baffle, like insulation around an electric cable, is perhaps the most incredible suggestion of all. That is an interesting suggestion. Is that what this guy, Christopher Dunn, believes? He's the guy that wrote the Giza Power. That's interesting. I haven't read his book, and I wasn't familiar with what he was jiving at, but that is interesting when you think about supposedly the Van Allen radiation belts being this ethereal energy barrier placed around Earth to keep us from escaping, and that these pyramids somehow served as a way to be able to mitigate that barrier. And you know, it being high technology people that created it, it's definitely an interesting proposition, and definitely makes me more interested to find out what he thought the rock wall had a correlation to this for. This theory is now championed by British engineer Christopher Dunn. Dunn is the author of the 1998 book, The Giza Power Plant, Technologies of Ancient Egypt. In his book, Dunn outlines his theories and gives evidence for advanced machining and engineering knowledge in ancient Egypt. Dunn claims that the Earth may be a giant power plant, and the many pyramids, obelisks, and megalithic standing stones may be a part of this great energy system. He says that the Great Pyramid was a giant power plant and that harmonic resonators were housed in slots above the king's chamber. Oh, so the resonant stuff of the rock wall, how it vibrated and rang like a bell, and when they put that big tractor on top of it, it shook like it was going to take flight. That's why he had an interest in the rock wall, because he thought it was a part of this another one of these megalithic structures that it works in combination with this energy grid system, and perhaps it does. Perhaps it does. I would say that's not a stretch, considering the information that I have. Well, that's not a stretch at all. So, okay, it didn't take me long to get that question answered. All right, yeah, totally. I mean, I could definitely see the rock walls being a part of that. He says that the giant pyramid was a giant power plant and that harmonic resonators were housed in slots above the king's chamber. He also theorized that there was a hydrogen explosion inside the king's chamber that shut down the power plant's operation. In August 1984, Analog magazine published Dunn's article, Advanced Machining in Ancient Egypt. It was the study of the book Pyramids and the Temples of Giza, written by Sir William Flinders Petrie. Dunn is convinced that sophisticated machining was used in certain cases. Says Dunn, since the article's publication, I have visited Egypt twice, and with each visit, I leave with more respect for the ancient pyramid builders. Well, in Egypt in 1986, I visited the Cairo Museum, and I gave a copy of my article along with a business card to the director of the museum. He thanked me kindly, threw it in a drawer to join the other sundry material, and turned away. Another Egyptologist led me to the tool room to educate me in the methods of the ancient masons by showing me a few cases that housed primitive copper tools. I asked my host about the cutting of granite, for this was the focus of my article, and he explained that the ancient Egyptians cut a slot in the granite, inserted wooden wedges, and then soaked them with water. The wood swelled, creating pressure that split the rock. Splitting rock is vastly different than machining it, and he did not explain how copper implements were able to cut granite, but he was so enthusiastic with his dissertation that I did not interrupt. To prove his argument, he walked me over to a nearby travel agent, encouraging me to buy airplane tickets to Aswan, where he said the evidence is clear. I must, he insisted, see the quarry marks there as well as the unfinished obelisk. Dutifully, I bought the tickets and arrived at Aswan the next day. After learning some of the Egyptian customs, I got the impression that this was not the first time that my Egyptologist friend had made that quarry marks at Aswan trip to the travel agent. The quarry marks I saw there did not satisfy me that the methods described